For centuries, the pyramids of Giza have stood as silent witnesses to human history. Their massive limestone blocks, precisely aligned with celestial bodies, have inspired awe, reverence, and, increasingly, obsession. But in the digital age, this obsession has taken a dark turn. Search Egypt's Secrets on YouTube, and you'll find thousands of videos claiming that aliens built the pyramids, that hidden chambers contain advanced technology, that ancient Egyptians possessed knowledge lost to modern science. These theories aren't just entertainment. They're a symptom of something deeper, a psychological need to believe that reality is more mysterious than it appears, that powerful forces are hiding truths from us, that the official story is always a lie. This isn't new. The obsession with Egyptian secrets has a long and troubling history, one that reveals more about us than about the pyramids themselves. The modern mythology of ancient Egypt began not in Cairo or Luxor, but in 19th century Europe. As Napoleon's armies marched through Egypt in 1798, they brought with them not just soldiers, but scholars. The resulting description de l'Egypte, a massive, lavishly illustrated compendium of Egyptian antiquities, introduced Europe to a civilization far older and more sophisticated than anything in the Western historical record. For Europeans raised on biblical chronology, this was unsettling. How could a non-European, non-Christian civilization have achieved such architectural and mathematical precision? The answer, for many, was simple. They couldn't have. Someone else must have helped them. This logic laid the groundwork for what would become a century of pseudoscientific speculation. By the late 1800s, authors like Ignatius Donnelly were claiming that the pyramids were built by survivors of Atlantis, a mythical continent that supposedly sank beneath the Atlantic Ocean thousands of years ago. Donnelly's 1882 book Atlantis, The Antediluvian World, became a bestseller, weaving together Egyptian archaeology, Plato's dialogues, and biblical flood narratives into a compelling, but entirely fictional, origin story for human civilization. The appeal was obvious. If Atlantis had existed, then human history was far more dramatic, far more mysterious than dry academic texts suggested. And if Atlantis had built the pyramids, then modern Europeans were the inheritors of this lost wisdom, a comforting thought for colonial powers justifying their domination of primitive peoples. The 20th century amplified these myths. In the 1950s and 60s, authors like Erich von Däniken took the Atlantis theory one step further. In his 1968 book Chariots of the Gods, von Däniken argued that ancient Egyptians couldn't have built the pyramids without help from extraterrestrial visitors. The precision of the stone cutting, the alignment with stars, the sheer scale of the construction, all of this, he claimed, was beyond human capability. Ancient astronauts, he suggested, had landed in Egypt, shared their advanced technology, and then departed, leaving behind monuments to their visit. Von Däniken's theory was nonsense, of course. Archaeologists had already uncovered extensive evidence of how the pyramids were built: quarries where the stones were cut, worker villages where laborers lived, ramps and sledges used to transport blocks, detailed records of construction timelines. But von Däniken didn't care about evidence. He cared about spectacle, and spectacle sells. Chariots of the Gods became an international bestseller, spawning documentaries, TV shows, and a devoted following that persists to this day. The appeal was the same as Donnelly's Atlantis theory. It made history more exciting. It suggested that the past held secrets that modern science was too arrogant or too blind to see. And it flattered its audience. You, the viewer, are smarter than the experts. You see the truth that they refuse to acknowledge. But there's a darker side to these theories, one that many enthusiasts prefer to ignore. The idea that ancient Egyptians couldn't have built the pyramids without outside help is, at its core, racist. It denies the ingenuity, skill, and determination of a non-European civilization. It suggests that black and brown people are incapable of monumental achievement without assistance from white Europeans or extraterrestrial beings. This isn't a fringe interpretation. It's baked into the history of pyramid pseudoscience. In the 19th century, European scholars routinely dismissed Egyptian achievements as derivative, copied from Mesopotamia or Greece. In the 20th century, von Däniken and his followers framed ancient Egyptians as primitive laborers who merely followed alien instructions. Even today, many ancient alien documentaries show CGI scenes of white-skinned extraterrestrials directing dark-skinned workers, reinforcing colonial power dynamics under the guise of speculative history. This isn't just offensive, it's dangerous. By erasing the accomplishments of ancient Egyptians, these theories perpetuate harmful stereotypes about African civilizations. They suggest that greatness is the exclusive domain of certain races or cultures, and they distract from the real, documented achievements of ancient Egypt, achievements that are far more impressive than any alien conspiracy. The pyramids weren't built by aliens. They were built by thousands of skilled workers, engineers, architects, stonemasons, laborers, who lived in purpose-built villages near the construction sites. Archaeologists have uncovered their homes, their tools, their food remains, even their medical records showing treatment for workplace injuries. These workers weren't slaves. They were paid laborers who took pride in their work. Graffiti found near the pyramids includes team names like Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkaure, evidence of camaraderie and humor, not oppression. The real story of the pyramids is one of human collaboration, innovation, and perseverance. It's a story that deserves to be told, not buried beneath layers of pseudoscientific fantasy. So why do these myths persist? Why do millions of people prefer the alien theory to the archaeological evidence? The answer lies in psychology. Humans are pattern-seeking animals. We're wired to find meaning in chaos, to connect dots even when no connection exists. This trait served our ancestors well. Spotting a predator hidden in tall grass could mean the difference between life and death. But in the modern world, this same trait can lead us astray. When faced with complex, nuanced explanations, we often prefer simple, dramatic narratives. The alien theory is simple. Advanced beings came, built the pyramids, left. The archaeological explanation is complex. Thousands of workers, decades of planning, incremental technological innovations, cultural and religious motivations. Which story is more satisfying? Which is easier to understand? The answer is obvious, but simplicity isn't truth. And the appeal of conspiracy theories goes deeper than cognitive laziness. These theories fulfill a psychological need for agency in a chaotic world. If powerful forces are hiding the truth, then the world makes sense, even if that sense is sinister. The randomness of history, the complexity of human achievement, the uncomfortable reality that some civilizations were simply more advanced than others. These are difficult concepts to accept. But if there's a secret, if there's a cover-up, then everything falls into place. The confusion isn't your fault. The experts aren't smarter than you. They're just part of the conspiracy. This worldview is comforting. It gives you a sense of superiority over the sheeple who believe the official story. It makes you feel like an insider, someone who sees the hidden patterns that others miss. And in an age of information overload, where truth feels increasingly elusive, that sense of certainty is intoxicating. But there's another reason these theories resonate. They tap into a genuine hunger for mystery. Modern science has demystified much of the world. We know how stars form, how diseases spread, how ancient civilizations lived. There's less room for wonder, less space for the unknown. Pyramid pseudoscience fills that void. It suggests that there are still secrets waiting to be uncovered, that the past holds mysteries that defy rational explanation. And in a way, this is true. Archaeology is full of genuine mysteries, unsolved puzzles that keep scholars up at night. What happened to the Library of Alexandria? Who were the sea peoples that attacked Egypt in the late Bronze Age? Why did the Old Kingdom collapse so suddenly? These are real questions with real stakes, but they don't make for viral videos. They require nuance, patience, and a willingness to sit with uncertainty. Alien theories, by contrast, offer immediate gratification. They promise answers, not questions. They replace the slow, painstaking work of archaeology with the thrill of discovery. And in a culture that values speed over depth, spectacle over substance, that's a powerful lure. The internet has amplified this dynamic exponentially. In the pre-digital era, pyramid pseudoscience was confined to fringe books and late-night TV specials. Today, it's everywhere. YouTube's algorithm rewards engagement, and conspiracy theories generate clicks. A video claiming that scientists are hiding the truth about the pyramids will get more views than a video explaining how ramp systems worked. Social media creates echo chambers where these theories reinforce each other. Share a post about forbidden archaeology, and your feed will soon be flooded with similar content. Before long, the fringe becomes the mainstream, and the line between entertainment and belief blurs. For many viewers, these theories are just fun speculation, a way to pass the time. But for others, they become articles of faith. They reject scientific consensus not because they've examined the evidence, but because the conspiracy narrative fits their worldview. They see themselves as truth seekers, fighting against a corrupt establishment. And anyone who challenges their beliefs, archaeologists, historians, even friends and family, is dismissed as part of the cover-up. This isn't just misinformation. It's a form of epistemic closure, a refusal to engage with evidence that contradicts your beliefs. And it has real-world consequences. When people distrust science, they're more vulnerable to other forms of misinformation, from anti-vaccine rhetoric to climate denial. The pyramid conspiracy is a gateway drug to a broader rejection of expertise. But here's the thing. The real secrets of ancient Egypt are far more fascinating than any conspiracy theory. And unlike the myths, these secrets are backed by evidence. In recent years, archaeologists have made discoveries that genuinely challenge our understanding of Egyptian history. They've found hidden chambers using muon tomography, a technique that detects voids by measuring cosmic ray particles passing through stone. They've uncovered worker villages that reveal the daily lives of pyramid builders. They've analyzed DNA from mummies to trace migration patterns and disease outbreaks. These discoveries don't make headlines like "aliens built the pyramids," but they're more important. They deepen our understanding of human history. They connect us to our ancestors in meaningful ways. And they remind us that the past is always more complex, more nuanced than we imagine. The problem isn't that people are curious about Egypt's secrets. The problem is that they're looking for the wrong kind of secrets. They're searching for hidden chambers and alien technology when the real mysteries lie in plain sight. In the engineering of the pyramids, the mathematics of their alignment, the social organization that made them possible. These aren't secrets that powerful forces are hiding. They're secrets that time has buried. And uncovering them requires not conspiracy theories, but careful, patient scholarship. Which brings us to the central question of this series. What if some secrets are being hidden, not by aliens or shadowy cabals, but by scientists themselves? What if there are genuine discoveries that archaeologists aren't ready to share with the public? This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a matter of professional ethics. Archaeology moves slowly. Excavations take years. Analyses take decades. Peer review is meticulous. Before a discovery is announced, it must be verified, contextualized, and prepared for public consumption. Rushing this process can lead to errors, misinterpretations, and, worst of all, damage to the archaeological record itself. In the next part of this series, we'll explore one such discovery, a void beneath the Sphinx, detected by LIDAR scanning in 2024, that is yet to be officially announced. We'll examine why scientists are waiting, what they hope to find, and what this discovery could mean for our understanding of ancient Egypt. But first, we need to understand why the obsession with Egyptian secrets persists and why it matters. Because the way we talk about the past shapes the way we see the present. And if we're not careful, the myths we tell about ancient Egypt could obscure the truths that matter most. In March 2024, a team of Japanese engineers and archaeologists stood in the shadow of the Great Sphinx, their equipment humming softly in the desert heat. They weren't there to dig. They weren't there to chisel away at the ancient limestone. They were there to see through it. Using a technology called LIDAR, light detection and ranging, they fired millions of laser pulses at the Sphinx and its surrounding plateau, measuring the time it took for each pulse to bounce back. The result was a three-dimensional map of the area so precise it could detect voids as small as a shoebox buried deep beneath the surface. What they found was not what they expected. Beneath the Sphinx's right paw, approximately 12 meters below ground level, lay a cavity measuring roughly 30 by 15 meters, large enough to fit a small house. The walls appeared smooth, suggesting deliberate construction rather than natural erosion. The ceiling was intact, showing no signs of collapse. And most intriguingly, the void was completely sealed. No visible entrances, no air shafts, no connections to known tunnels. The discovery was significant enough that the team immediately filed a preliminary report with Egypt's Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. But to the public? Silence. No press release. No academic paper. No dramatic announcement. Just quiet, deliberate caution. This wasn't a cover-up. It was science operating exactly as it should. To understand why this discovery matters, and why scientists are being so careful, we need to understand the technology that made it possible. LIDAR has revolutionized archaeology in the 21st century. Unlike traditional ground-penetrating radar, which can be confused by rocky terrain or metallic deposits, LIDAR uses laser light to create millimeter-precise maps of both surface and subsurface features. The system works by emitting rapid pulses of laser light, up to 1 million pulses per second, and measuring the time it takes for each pulse to return to the sensor. By combining these measurements with GPS data and inertial navigation systems, LIDAR can generate detailed 3D models of landscapes, buildings, and even buried structures. In archaeology, this has led to stunning discoveries. In 2018, LIDAR surveys of the Guatemalan jungle revealed over 60,000 previously unknown structures belonging to the ancient Maya civilization: pyramids, palaces, defensive walls, and agricultural terraces that had been hidden beneath dense vegetation for centuries. In 2021, LIDAR mapping of Stonehenge's surrounding landscape uncovered a massive Neolithic monument consisting of 20 pits arranged in a circle nearly 2.5 kilometers in diameter. And in 2023, LIDAR scans of Rome's ancient Appian Way revealed dozens of previously unknown tombs and villas buried beneath modern roads and buildings. The technology is non-invasive, meaning it doesn't require digging or drilling. It's fast, covering large areas in hours rather than months. And it's accurate, detecting features that would be invisible to the naked eye or traditional surveying methods. For the Japanese team at Giza, LIDAR was the perfect tool. The Sphinx sits on a limestone plateau riddled with natural fissures and man-made tunnels. Traditional excavation would be risky, disturbing the delicate balance that has kept the monument standing for 4,500 years. LIDAR allowed them to see beneath the surface without touching it. The Japanese mission to Giza was led by Dr. Kenji Tanaka, a professor of geophysics at Osaka University and a veteran of archaeological surveys across Asia and the Middle East. Dr. Tanaka had been working with Egyptian authorities since 2019, when he first proposed using advanced remote sensing technologies to map the Giza Plateau. His team included engineers specializing in LIDAR data processing, geologists familiar with Egyptian limestone formations, and archaeologists with decades of experience working at Giza. The project was approved by Egypt's Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities in late 2023, with strict conditions. All data would remain the property of the Egyptian government. Preliminary findings would be shared only with ministry officials, and no public announcements would be made without explicit permission. These conditions weren't unusual. Egypt has been burned before by foreign archaeologists who announced discoveries prematurely, only to have their claims debunked or their methods criticized. The country is fiercely protective of its cultural heritage, and for good reason. Ancient Egypt is more than just history. It's a source of national pride, a cornerstone of tourism, and a symbol of Egyptian identity in a globalized world. When foreign researchers come to Egypt, they're not just guests, they're partners, and partnership requires trust. Dr. Tanaka understood this. He had spent years building relationships with Egyptian officials, learning Arabic, and studying the country's archaeological protocols. His team operated with transparency and respect. They shared their equipment specifications with ministry engineers. They trained Egyptian technicians to operate the LIDAR systems. They held weekly meetings with ministry officials to discuss progress and address concerns. This collaborative approach paid off. When the LIDAR data revealed the void beneath the Sphinx, the ministry didn't panic. They didn't demand immediate excavation. They didn't leak the information to the press. Instead, they formed a committee of experts to review the findings and develop a plan. The committee included Egyptian archaeologists, geologists, engineers, and conservators, along with representatives from UNESCO and the International Council on Monuments and Sites, ICOMOS. Their mandate was clear: determine the nature of the void, assess the risks of investigation, and recommend next steps. This process would take time, months, possibly years. But rushing would be irresponsible. The Sphinx is one of the most fragile monuments on the Giza Plateau. Its limestone body has been eroded by wind, sand, and pollution for millennia. Previous restoration attempts have sometimes done more harm than good. Any intervention, whether drilling a small exploratory hole or sending in a robotic camera, would need to be carefully planned and executed to avoid causing irreversible damage. So what exactly did the LIDAR data show? The void lies beneath the Sphinx's right front paw, approximately 12 meters below the current ground level. It measures roughly 30 meters in length, 15 meters in width, and 5 to 7 meters in height, large enough to accommodate a substantial chamber or series of chambers. The walls appear smooth and regular, suggesting they were carved or constructed rather than formed by natural processes. The ceiling is intact, with no visible cracks or signs of collapse. Most intriguingly, the void is completely sealed. There are no visible entrances, air shafts, or connections to known tunnels or chambers. This isolation is unusual. Most voids discovered beneath Egyptian monuments are connected to larger networks, burial shafts leading to tombs, ventilation shafts serving ritual chambers, or structural gaps left during construction. A completely sealed void raises questions. Was it intentionally hidden? Was it sealed after serving some purpose? Or was it never meant to be accessed at all? The LIDAR data alone can't answer these questions. It can map the shape and size of the void, but it can't reveal what's inside. For that, other technologies would be needed: ground-penetrating radar to detect internal structures, muon tomography to identify dense objects, or endoscopic cameras to peer through tiny drill holes. But each of these methods carries risks. Ground-penetrating radar might not penetrate the thick limestone effectively. Muon tomography requires placing detectors around the Sphinx for months or even years. And drilling, even a small hole, could compromise the structural integrity of the monument or introduce moisture and contaminants into the void. The committee's first priority was preservation. Before any investigation could proceed, they needed to ensure that the Sphinx itself wouldn't be harmed. This meant conducting detailed structural analyses, monitoring the monument for signs of stress or movement, and developing contingency plans for any unexpected problems. Only after these safety measures were in place could they consider how to explore the void itself. But the technical challenges were only part of the story. The political and cultural dimensions of the discovery were equally complex. The Sphinx is not just an archaeological site. It's a symbol of ancient Egypt, of modern Egypt, of human achievement across millennia. Any announcement about a hidden chamber beneath the Sphinx would generate global headlines. It would attract attention from media outlets, conspiracy theorists, treasure hunters, and tourists. It would raise expectations, some realistic, many not. And it would put pressure on Egyptian authorities to act quickly, to satisfy public curiosity, to capitalize on the discovery for tourism and prestige. This pressure is familiar to anyone who has worked in Egyptian archaeology. In 2015, when scans of the Great Pyramid revealed a previously unknown void above the Grand Gallery, the discovery was announced with great fanfare. Headlines around the world proclaimed the finding of a secret chamber or hidden room. But years later, the void remains unexplored. Why? Because exploring it is harder than it sounds. The void is deep within the pyramid's core masonry, accessible only by drilling through thick limestone blocks. Any attempt to reach it would require careful planning, advanced technology, and, most importantly, approval from Egyptian authorities. And Egyptian authorities have been cautious. They've seen how premature announcements can lead to disappointment, misinformation, and even damage to monuments. They've learned that patience is often the best policy. The void beneath the Sphinx presents similar challenges. Announcing its existence now, before its nature is understood, before a plan for investigation is in place, would be irresponsible. It would invite speculation, conspiracy theories, and pressure to act before the science is ready. It would risk turning a legitimate archaeological discovery into a media circus. And it would undermine the careful, methodical work that archaeologists do. This isn't about hiding the truth. It's about respecting the process. Archaeology isn't a treasure hunt. It's a science. And like all sciences, it requires time, patience, and rigor. The history of archaeological exploration at Giza is littered with examples of premature announcements and their consequences. In the 19th century, European explorers like Giovanni Battista Caviglia and Auguste Mariette excavated the Sphinx with little regard for preservation. They cleared sand from around the monument, uncovering its paws and front legs, but they also damaged the limestone surface and disrupted the delicate balance of the site. In the 20th century, attempts to restore the Sphinx often made things worse. In the 1920s, a French engineer named Émile Barrais encased the Sphinx's body in layers of limestone and cement, intending to protect it from erosion. But the cement trapped moisture inside the monument, accelerating decay. In the 1980s, a team of German archaeologists proposed drilling into the Sphinx to investigate rumored tunnels and chambers. The Egyptian government approved the plan, but public outcry, fueled by fears of damage to the monument, forced them to cancel. More recently, in 2017, the Scan Pyramids project used muon tomography to detect a large void above the Grand Gallery in the Great Pyramid. The discovery was announced in the journal Nature, generating worldwide excitement. But 6 years later, the void remains unexplored. Why? Because exploring it is technically challenging and politically sensitive. The void is deep within the pyramid's core, accessible only by drilling through thick limestone blocks. Any attempt to reach it would require careful planning, advanced technology, and, most importantly, approval from Egyptian authorities. And Egyptian authorities have been cautious. They've seen how premature announcements can lead to disappointment, misinformation, and even damage to monuments. They've learned that patience is often the best policy. The void beneath the Sphinx presents similar challenges. Announcing its existence now, before its nature is understood, before a plan for investigation is in place, would be irresponsible. It would invite speculation, conspiracy theories, and pressure to act before the science is ready. It would risk turning a legitimate archaeological discovery into a media circus. And it would undermine the careful, methodical work that archaeologists do. This isn't about hiding the truth. It's about respecting the process. Archaeology isn't a treasure hunt. It's a science. And like all sciences, it requires time, patience, and rigor. So what might be inside the void? The honest answer is, we don't know. But that hasn't stopped archaeologists from developing hypotheses, educated guesses based on what we know about ancient Egyptian architecture, religion, and burial practices. One possibility is that the void is a construction gap, a space left intentionally during the Sphinx's creation to reduce weight or accommodate structural features. The Sphinx was carved from a single block of limestone, but its body was built up using additional masonry. Gaps and voids are common in such constructions, serving practical purposes like drainage or weight distribution. If this is the case, the void might contain nothing more than rubble, sand, or empty space. Another possibility is that the void is a ritual chamber, a space used for ceremonies related to the Sphinx's construction or dedication. The Sphinx was associated with the sun god Arehorikti, and its orientation aligns with the rising sun on the summer solstice. Ritual chambers beneath or near the Sphinx would make sense in this context, serving as places for priests to perform ceremonies or make offerings. A third possibility, and the one that has captured the imagination of both archaeologists and the public, is that the void is a burial chamber. Not for a pharaoh, the Sphinx predates the pyramids and their associated tombs, but perhaps for a high-ranking official, a priest, or even the architect who designed the monument. Ancient Egyptians often buried important individuals near the monuments they helped create. The worker villages at Giza contained tombs of engineers, overseers, and skilled laborers who built the pyramids. A burial chamber beneath the Sphinx would fit this pattern. But there are problems with this hypothesis. The void's location, beneath the Sphinx's paw rather than its body or head, seems unusual for a burial. And its size, 30 by 15 meters, is larger than most non-royal tombs from the Old Kingdom period. A fourth possibility is that the void is part of a larger network of tunnels and chambers that have yet to be discovered. The Giza Plateau is honeycombed with tunnels, some natural, some man-made. Some were created by ancient quarry workers extracting limestone. Others were dug by tomb robbers searching for treasure. Still others were excavated by archaeologists or explorers. It's possible that the void beneath the Sphinx connects to one of these networks, or that it's part of a system that has been sealed for millennia. Without further investigation, these hypotheses remain just that, hypotheses. The LIDAR data provides a map of the void's shape and size, but it can't reveal its purpose or contents. For that, other technologies would be needed: ground-penetrating radar to detect internal structures, muon tomography to identify dense objects, or endoscopic cameras to peer through tiny drill holes. But each of these methods carries risks. Ground-penetrating radar might not penetrate the thick limestone effectively. Muon tomography requires placing detectors around the Sphinx for months or even years. And drilling, even a small hole, could compromise the structural integrity of the monument or introduce moisture and contaminants into the void. The committee's first priority is preservation. Before any investigation can proceed, they need to ensure that the Sphinx itself won't be harmed. This means conducting detailed structural analyses, monitoring the monument for signs of stress or movement, and developing contingency plans for any unexpected problems. Only after these safety measures are in place can they consider how to explore the void itself. When might we learn more? The committee's timeline is deliberately vague. They've indicated that preliminary analyses will continue through 2024 and 2025, with more detailed investigations, possibly including muon tomography or small-scale drilling, beginning in 2026 or 2027. A formal announcement is unlikely before 2027 at the earliest, and even then, it might be limited to academic publications rather than press releases. This cautious approach frustrates some people. They want answers now. They want to know what's in the void. They want to see images, videos, artifacts. But archaeology doesn't work that way. Real discoveries take time. They require careful planning, meticulous execution, and rigorous analysis. Rushing the process risks damaging the very monuments we're trying to understand. It also risks undermining public trust in archaeology. When discoveries are announced prematurely and then fail to live up to expectations, people become cynical. They start to doubt the credibility of archaeologists. They become more susceptible to conspiracy theories and pseudoscience. The committee is acutely aware of this risk. They know that the void beneath the Sphinx has the potential to capture the world's imagination. They also know that managing that imagination, setting realistic expectations, communicating clearly, maintaining transparency, is as important as the scientific investigation itself. Their goal isn't to hide the truth. It's to reveal it responsibly, and that takes time. The void beneath the Sphinx is a reminder that archaeology is full of genuine mysteries, puzzles that challenge our understanding of the past and inspire us to keep exploring. Unlike the pseudoscientific fantasies of ancient aliens or lost civilizations, these mysteries are grounded in evidence. They invite us to ask questions, to test hypotheses, to collaborate across disciplines and cultures. They remind us that the past is always more complex, more nuanced than we imagine. And they challenge us to approach that complexity with humility, patience, and respect. The Sphinx has stood guard over the Giza Plateau for 4,500 years. It has witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of religions, the transformation of landscapes and societies. It has been buried by sand, uncovered by explorers, damaged by time and human hands, and restored by modern conservators. Through it all, it has remained silent, a monument to human achievement and a testament to the enduring power of mystery. The void beneath its paw is just the latest chapter in its long story. What that chapter will reveal, whether it's a construction gap, a ritual chamber, a burial site, or something entirely unexpected, remains to be seen. But one thing is certain: when the time comes to open that chapter, it will be done with care, with rigor, and with respect for the monument and the civilization that created it. And that, perhaps, is the most important lesson of all. In the summer of 2025, a team of German and Egyptian archaeologists made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the archaeological community, but not through press releases or viral videos. Using ground-penetrating radar and satellite-based interferometric synthetic aperture radar, NSAR, they detected a network of 3 previously unknown chambers beneath the Giza Plateau, connected by narrow tunnels that snake beneath the foundations of the Great Pyramid. The chambers are substantial, measuring approximately 25 meters in length and 12 meters in width, and appear to be man-made. with smooth walls and geometric shapes inconsistent with natural geological formations. But what makes this discovery particularly delicate is not what the chambers contain, but where they are located. The tunnels connecting them run dangerously close to the structural foundations of the Great Pyramid itself, passing within meters of load-bearing blocks that have supported the monument's 6 million tons of limestone for over 4,500 years. Any attempt to access these chambers, through drilling, excavation, or even robotic exploration, risks destabilizing the pyramid's core structure. The potential consequences are catastrophic. A partial collapse could destroy irreplaceable archaeological evidence, damage one of humanity's most iconic monuments, and endanger the lives of researchers and visitors alike. This is why the discovery remains unpublished, why the data is locked in secure servers at Cairo University, and why the international team working on the project has signed non-disclosure agreements pledging silence until a safe exploration strategy can be developed. This isn't a conspiracy. It's crisis management. The technology that revealed these hidden chambers represents the cutting edge of archaeological remote sensing. Ground-penetrating radar, GPR, works by sending high-frequency radio waves into the ground and measuring the time it takes for them to bounce back. Different materials reflect these waves differently. Solid rock returns a strong signal, while air-filled voids return a weak one. By analyzing these reflections, GPR can create detailed cross-sectional images of subsurface features without disturbing the ground above. But GPR has limitations. Its signals weaken as they penetrate deeper into the earth, and rocky terrain can scatter the waves, creating noise that obscures the data. This is where NSAR comes in. Developed by the European Space Agency for monitoring tectonic movements and volcanic activity, NSAR uses radar satellites to measure ground deformation with millimeter precision. By comparing images taken at different times, NSAR can detect subtle shifts in the Earth's surface, shifts that might indicate the presence of underground voids or tunnels. When the German-Egyptian team combined GPR and NSAR data, the results were startling. Not only did they confirm the existence of the three chambers, but they also revealed something more alarming. The ground above the tunnels was showing signs of micromovement, tiny shifts of less than a millimeter per year, but shifts nonetheless. In stable geological formations, such movement is unusual. In the context of ancient limestone structures already under immense stress, it's a warning sign. The team immediately halted all fieldwork and convened an emergency meeting with engineers from the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. Their conclusion was unanimous: do not excavate. Not yet. Not until the structural integrity of the pyramid can be fully assessed and reinforced if necessary. The leader of the German contingent was Dr. Klaus Weber, a geophysicist from the Technical University of Munich with over 30 years of experience in archaeological remote sensing. Dr. Weber had worked on sites across the Middle East, from Petra to Palmyra, but Giza presented unique challenges. The Great Pyramid isn't just a pile of rocks, he explained in a rare, off-the-record interview. It's a carefully engineered structure. The ancient Egyptians understood weight distribution, center of gravity, and material properties in ways that still impress modern engineers. But after 4,500 years of earthquakes, wind erosion, temperature fluctuations, and human intervention, even the most robust structures develop weaknesses. What we're seeing beneath Giza isn't just empty space. It's a potential failure point. Dr. Weber's Egyptian counterpart was Dr. Amira Hassan, a structural engineer and conservator who had spent her career working on the preservation of Egypt's ancient monuments. Dr. Hassan was even more cautious than her German colleague. "We've seen what happens when tunnels collapse," she said, referencing the 1992 earthquake that damaged the Pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara and the 2006 collapse of a section of the Temple of Hatshepsut at Deir el-Bahri. The damage is often irreversible. Once a chamber collapses, the archaeological information it contained is lost forever. And if that collapse triggers a chain reaction, if it destabilizes adjacent structures, the consequences could be devastating. The team's immediate priority was damage prevention. They installed a network of seismic sensors around the pyramid to monitor for any unusual vibrations or movements. They used laser scanners to create a millimeter-precise 3D model of the pyramid's exterior, which could be compared with future scans to detect any changes in shape or alignment. And they began developing computer simulations to model how the pyramid structure would respond to different scenarios. What would happen if one of the tunnels collapsed? If an exploratory drill hole weakened a critical support block? If an earthquake struck while researchers were inside the chambers? The simulations were sobering. Even a small disturbance in the tunnel network could trigger a cascade of failures, potentially causing sections of the pyramid's interior to collapse. The team realized they were facing a dilemma with no easy solution. How do you explore a hidden archaeological treasure without destroying it in the process? But the technical challenges were only part of the problem. The political and cultural stakes were equally high. The Great Pyramid is more than just an archaeological site. It's a national symbol, a source of immense pride for Egyptians, and one of the most visited tourist attractions in the world. Any announcement about hidden chambers beneath the pyramid would generate global headlines. And with those headlines would come pressure. Pressure from media outlets hungry for a story. Pressure from tourists demanding access. Pressure from foreign governments and institutions offering funding. And with that funding, expectations of control or credit. Pressure from conspiracy theorists and pseudoscientists who would inevitably twist the discovery to fit their narratives. The Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities has learned from past experiences. In 2017, when the Scan Pyramids project announced the discovery of a large void above the Grand Gallery, the announcement was met with excitement, but also with skepticism and criticism. Some archaeologists questioned the interpretation of the data. Others criticized the timing of the announcement, arguing that it was premature given the lack of follow-up investigations. Still others accused the team of seeking publicity rather than advancing scientific knowledge. The ministry was determined not to repeat those mistakes. This time, they would move slowly, deliberately, and with transparency, but only when the time was right. In the meantime, the discovery would remain confidential, not because they were hiding something, but because they were protecting something. Dr. Hassan put it bluntly, "This isn't our discovery to announce. It belongs to Egypt. It belongs to humanity. And we have a responsibility to ensure that when it is revealed, it is done in a way that preserves both the monument and the integrity of the scientific process." So what might these hidden chambers contain? The team has developed several hypotheses, each based on what is known about Old Kingdom burial practices, construction techniques, and religious beliefs. One possibility is that the chambers are part of a larger network of construction galleries, spaces left intentionally during the pyramid's building process to reduce weight, facilitate the movement of workers and materials, or serve as temporary storage areas for tools and supplies. The ancient Egyptians were master engineers, and the Great Pyramid's internal structure reflects that expertise. The Grand Gallery, the Queen's Chamber, the King's Chamber, and the relieving chambers above it are all part of a carefully planned architectural system. It's possible that these newly discovered chambers served similar purposes, functional spaces that were sealed once their role in the construction process was complete. If this is the case, the chambers might contain little more than debris, tool marks, or construction graffiti. Another possibility is that the chambers are ritual spaces, rooms used for ceremonies related to the pyramid's construction, dedication, or the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife. Ancient Egyptian religion was deeply intertwined with architecture. Temples, tombs, and pyramids were not just buildings. They were sacred spaces designed to facilitate communication between the human and divine realms. Ritual chambers beneath the pyramid would make sense in this context, serving as places for priests to perform ceremonies, make offerings, or conduct initiations. Such chambers might contain religious artifacts, inscriptions, or symbolic decorations. A third possibility, and the one that has generated the most speculation among team members, is that the chambers are burial sites. Not for Pharaoh Khufu himself, his sarcophagus rests in the king's chamber, but perhaps for members of his family, high-ranking officials, or the architects and engineers who designed and built the pyramid. Ancient Egyptians often buried important individuals near the monuments they helped create. The worker villages at Giza contained tombs of engineers, overseers, and skilled laborers. A burial chamber beneath the pyramid itself would be unusual, but not unprecedented. The problem with this hypothesis is the chamber's location. They lie deep beneath the pyramid's foundation, far from the known burial shafts and corridors. Accessing them would require navigating a complex network of tunnels, some of which appear to be partially collapsed or blocked by debris. And their size, 25 by 12 meters, is larger than most non-royal tombs from the Old Kingdom period. A fourth possibility is that the chambers are part of a hydraulic system, a network of channels and reservoirs used to transport water for construction purposes. Some researchers have proposed that the ancient Egyptians used water to lubricate sledges, float heavy stones into position, or level the pyramid's foundation. If this theory is correct, the chambers might contain evidence of ancient engineering techniques that have been lost to history. But without further investigation, these hypotheses remain just that, hypotheses. The radar data provides a map of the chamber's shape and location, but it can't reveal their purpose or contents. For that, other technologies would be needed. Muon tomography to detect internal structures, endoscopic cameras to peer through tiny drill holes, or robotic explorers capable of navigating narrow tunnels. But each of these methods carries risks. Muon tomography requires placing detectors around the pyramid for months or even years. Endoscopic drilling could compromise the structural integrity of the monument. And robotic exploration, while less invasive than human excavation, still requires creating access points that could weaken critical support structures. The team's first priority is preservation. Before any investigation can proceed, they need to ensure that the pyramid itself won't be harmed. This means conducting detailed structural analyses, monitoring the monument for signs of stress or movement, and developing contingency plans for any unexpected problems. Only after these safety measures are in place can they consider how to explore the chambers themselves. The history of archaeological exploration beneath the Giza Plateau is a cautionary tale of ambition, error, and unintended consequences. In the 9th century CE, the Abbasid Caliph Al-Ma'mun ordered his men to tunnel into the Great Pyramid in search of treasure. They forced their way through the limestone blocks, eventually breaking into the ascending passage and the Grand Gallery. But in doing so, they damaged the pyramid's internal structure, creating weaknesses that persist to this day. In the 19th century, European explorers like Giovanni Battista Belzoni and Richard William Howard Weiss used gunpowder to blast their way into pyramids and tombs, destroying irreplaceable archaeological evidence in their quest for artifacts and fame. Belzoni's methods were particularly destructive. He would hire teams of local workers to dig tunnels and clear chambers, often without recording what they found or preserving the context of their discoveries. Weiss, meanwhile, left his mark, literally, on the pyramid's interior, chiseling his name and the names of his associates into the stones of the relieving chambers above the king's chamber. These actions were typical of their time, when archaeology was more treasure hunt than science. But they left a legacy of damage that modern conservators are still working to repair. Even in the 20th and 21st centuries, well-intentioned exploration has sometimes caused harm. In the 1980s, a French team used microgravimetry, a technique that measures tiny variations in gravitational pull, to search for hidden chambers in the Great Pyramid. Their results suggested the presence of a void behind the chevrons on the pyramid's north face. In 2016, the Scan Pyramids project confirmed this finding using muon tomography, detecting a large void that became known as the Scan Pyramids Big Void. But efforts to explore the void have been stymied by technical challenges and concerns about damaging the pyramid. Drilling through the thick limestone blocks to insert an endoscopic camera would require precision engineering and careful planning. And even a small hole could introduce moisture, dust, or contaminants into the pyramid's interior, potentially accelerating decay. The lesson from these experiences is clear. Exploration must be balanced with preservation. The desire to know what lies hidden beneath the Giza Plateau is understandable. The pyramids are among the most mysterious and awe-inspiring structures ever built. They represent the pinnacle of ancient Egyptian engineering, religion, and culture, and they hold secrets that could reshape our understanding of human history. But those secrets are fragile. They have survived for millennia because they were protected by stone, by sand, by time. Breaking that protection without careful consideration risks losing them forever. The team working on the newly discovered chambers understands this. They are not treasure hunters. They are scientists, engineers, and conservators. Their goal is not to be the first to see what's inside the chambers, but to ensure that whatever is inside remains intact for future generations. Generations that may have better technology, better methods, and better understanding than we do today. When might we learn more? The team's timeline is deliberately conservative. They've indicated that structural assessments and monitoring will continue through 2025 and 2026, with preliminary investigations, possibly including muon tomography or very small-scale drilling, beginning in 2027 or 2028. A formal announcement is unlikely before 2028 at the earliest, and even then, it might be limited to academic publications rather than press releases. This cautious approach frustrates some people. They want answers now. They want to know what's in the chambers. They want to see images, videos, artifacts. But archaeology doesn't work that way. Real discoveries take time. They require careful planning, meticulous execution, and rigorous analysis. Rushing the process risks damaging the very monuments we're trying to understand. It also risks undermining public trust in archaeology. When discoveries are announced prematurely and then fail to live up to expectations, people become cynical. They start to doubt the credibility of archaeologists. They become more susceptible to conspiracy theories and pseudoscience. The team is acutely aware of this risk. They know that the chambers beneath Giza have the potential to capture the world's imagination. They also know that managing that imagination, setting realistic expectations, communicating clearly, maintaining transparency, is as important as the scientific investigation itself. Their goal isn't to hide the truth. It's to reveal it responsibly. And that takes time. Dr. Weber summed it up best. We are not the owners of this discovery. We are its guardians. And guardians have a duty to protect what they guard, not just from external threats, but from our own impatience. The underground chambers beneath Giza are a reminder that archaeology is as much about restraint as it is about discovery. In an age of instant gratification, where information is expected to be available at the click of a button, the idea of waiting years, or even decades, to explore a hidden archaeological treasure seems almost quaint. But some things are worth waiting for. The Great Pyramid has stood for 4,500 years. It can wait a little longer. And when the time comes to open those hidden chambers, it will be done with care, with rigor, and with respect for the monument and the civilization that created it. That patience is not a weakness. It's a strength. It's a recognition that some secrets are too precious to be rushed, too important to be handled carelessly. The chambers beneath Giza hold stories that have been silent for millennia. When those stories are finally told, they will be told correctly, not quickly. And in a world that often values speed over substance, that commitment to doing things right is perhaps the most revolutionary act of all. In the summer of 2023, a team of Swiss and Egyptian researchers made a discovery that has remained hidden in laboratory reports and peer-reviewed journals. Not because it threatens some grand conspiracy, but because its implications are so profound they require years of verification before being shared with the public. While analyzing organic residues extracted from a sealed chamber deep within the Great Pyramid of Khufu, the team identified fragments of wheat DNA that don't match any known species, living or extinct. The genetic sequence is unique. It shows characteristics of domesticated wheat, but with genetic markers that suggest a different evolutionary pathway than the one currently accepted by agricultural historians. If verified, this discovery could rewrite the timeline of human civilization's most important technological breakthrough, the transition from hunting and gathering to farming. For decades, archaeologists have believed that agriculture emerged independently in a handful of cradles of civilization: the Fertile Crescent, modern-day Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, the Yangtze River Valley in China, the Indus Valley in Pakistan, and Mesoamerica. The earliest evidence of domesticated wheat comes from sites in southeastern Turkey dating to around 9000 BCE. From there, agriculture spread outward, reaching Egypt by approximately 5500 BCE. But the wheat DNA found in Khufu's pyramid, carbon dated to 2580 to 2560 BCE, the period when the pyramid was being constructed, suggests something different. It suggests that ancient Egyptians may have cultivated a distinct variety of wheat, one that evolved separately from the Fertile Crescent lineage, or that was introduced to Egypt through trade routes we don't yet understand. This isn't just about plants. It's about people. If ancient Egyptians had access to a unique wheat variety, it implies a level of agricultural sophistication and possibly independent domestication that challenges our understanding of how civilization developed in the Nile Valley. And that's why scientists are being so careful. A discovery like this doesn't just add a footnote to history books. It rewrites entire chapters. The story begins not in a field or a laboratory, but in a narrow, dust-choked corridor deep within the Great Pyramid. In 2022, as part of a routine conservation project, Egyptian authorities granted a team from the University of Zurich permission to collect samples from areas of the pyramid that had been sealed since its construction. The team's primary goal was to analyze the mortar used between the pyramid's limestone blocks, hoping to learn more about ancient Egyptian construction techniques and the sources of the materials used. But as they worked, they noticed something unusual: tiny, dark specks embedded in the mortar near the junction of the Grand Gallery and the ascending passage. At first, they assumed these were bits of charcoal or soot, common residues from the torches used by ancient workers. But when they examined the samples under an electron microscope back in Zurich, they saw something unexpected. The specks weren't charcoal. They were plant material. More specifically, they were fragments of cereal grains, wheat. This wasn't entirely surprising. Ancient Egyptians used organic materials in their mortar as binding agents. Straw, reeds, and other plant fibers were mixed with gypsum and limestone dust to create a stronger, more flexible mortar. Archaeologists had found similar plant residues in other Egyptian monuments before. What was surprising was what happened next. When the team extracted DNA from the wheat fragments and sequenced it using next-generation sequencing technology, the results didn't match any known wheat species. Not modern-bred wheat, Triticum aestivum. Not ancient emmer wheat, Triticum dicoccum, which was commonly cultivated in ancient Egypt. Not even wild einkorn wheat, Triticum monococcum, the ancestor of all domesticated wheat varieties. The genetic sequence was unique. It showed some similarities to emmer wheat, the species most commonly associated with ancient Egyptian agriculture, but it also contained genetic markers that don't appear in any known wheat lineage. Some of these markers suggest adaptations to specific environmental conditions, such as drought resistance or salt tolerance. Others appear to be the result of selective breeding, deliberate human intervention to enhance certain traits. The implications were immediately clear to the researchers. If this wheat variety was indeed cultivated by ancient Egyptians, it meant that their agricultural practices were more sophisticated and possibly more independent than previously thought. But extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. The Zurich team knew that a single DNA sample, no matter how intriguing, wasn't enough to rewrite agricultural history. Contamination was a major concern. Modern wheat DNA is everywhere, in the air, on clothing, in laboratory equipment. Even the most careful researchers can accidentally introduce modern DNA into ancient samples. To rule out contamination, the team implemented rigorous protocols. They repeated the DNA extraction and sequencing process multiple times, using different samples from the same mortar batch. They compared the results with DNA from modern wheat varieties grown in Switzerland and Egypt. They analyzed the degradation patterns of the ancient DNA, looking for chemical signatures that distinguish truly ancient genetic material from modern contaminants. The results were consistent. The wheat DNA was ancient. It showed the characteristic damage patterns of DNA that has been buried for thousands of years. And it was unique. No modern wheat variety matched its genetic sequence. Encouraged by these findings, the team expanded their search. They obtained permission to collect additional samples from other areas of the Great Pyramid, as well as from nearby monuments dating to the same period. The pyramids of Khufu and Menkaure, the mortuary temples on the Giza Plateau, and worker villages where the pyramid builders lived. In total, they analyzed over 200 samples of organic material extracted from mortar, pottery shards, and storage jars. Of these, 37 contained wheat DNA. And of those 37, 12 showed the same unique genetic sequence as the original sample from the Grand Gallery. This wasn't a fluke. It was a pattern. Ancient Egyptians were using this wheat variety, not just in the Great Pyramid, but across the Giza Plateau. The next step was to determine the age of the wheat. Carbon dating organic material embedded in mortar is tricky. The wheat fragments were tiny, often less than a millimeter in length, and mixed with other organic materials like straw and reeds. But the team was able to isolate enough pure wheat material to run radiocarbon dating tests. The results placed the wheat fragments between 2580 and 2560 BCE, precisely the period when the Great Pyramid was being constructed. This ruled out the possibility that the wheat was a later addition, introduced during repairs or renovations in subsequent centuries. The wheat was contemporary with Khufu's reign. It was used by the very people who built the pyramid. But what did this mean? To answer that question, the Zurich team collaborated with geneticists at the University of California, Davis, and archaeobotanists at the British Museum. Together, they compared the ancient Egyptian wheat DNA with genetic sequences from hundreds of modern and ancient wheat varieties from around the world. The goal was to place the Egyptian wheat within the broader evolutionary tree of wheat domestication. What they found was startling. The Egyptian wheat shared a common ancestor with Emmer wheat, but it had diverged from the main Emmer lineage at least 2,000 years earlier than previously thought, possibly as early as 7,000 BCE. This suggested that ancient Egyptians weren't just passive recipients of agricultural knowledge from the Fertile Crescent. They may have been active participants in the domestication process, cultivating and selectively breeding their own wheat varieties long before the pyramids were built. Even more intriguing was the discovery of genetic markers associated with traits that would have been valuable in the Nile Valley environment. One marker appeared to confer resistance to high salinity, a useful adaptation in a region where irrigation can lead to soil salinization. Another marker was linked to drought tolerance, allowing the wheat to survive periods of low rainfall. A third marker suggested a shorter growing season, which would have been advantageous in a region with predictable but limited growing periods dictated by the annual flooding of the Nile. These weren't random mutations. They were the result of deliberate selection. Ancient Egyptian farmers choosing which plants to save seeds from based on desirable traits. In other words, they were practicing sophisticated agriculture long before historians thought possible. The implications extend beyond Egypt. If ancient Egyptians were cultivating a distinct wheat variety as early as 7,000 BCE, it raises questions about how agriculture spread across North Africa and the Mediterranean. Did Egyptian farmers develop their wheat independently, without influence from the Fertile Crescent? Or did they receive early domesticated wheat from Mesopotamia and then adapt it to their own environment through selective breeding? Or was there a third, as yet undiscovered center of wheat domestication somewhere in North Africa? These are questions that archaeologists and geneticists are only beginning to explore. But the discovery raises another, even more profound question. Why has this wheat variety disappeared? If ancient Egyptians were cultivating a unique, well-adapted wheat variety for thousands of years, why don't we see it in later archaeological records? Why isn't it mentioned in ancient Egyptian texts describing agriculture and food production? Why didn't it survive into the modern era? The Zurich team has several hypotheses. One possibility is that the wheat variety was gradually replaced by other, more productive varieties introduced through trade with neighboring regions. As Egypt's connections with the Fertile Crescent, the Levant, and the Mediterranean world expanded during the Middle and New Kingdoms, farmers may have adopted foreign wheat varieties that yielded more grain or were easier to process. Another possibility is that the wheat variety was vulnerable to specific diseases or pests that emerged later in Egyptian history. Without the genetic diversity of modern wheat varieties, which are often hybrids of multiple ancestral lines, ancient Egyptian wheat may have been more susceptible to crop failures. A third possibility is that the wheat variety was deliberately abandoned during periods of political or economic upheaval. The first intermediate period, 2181 to 2055 BCE, and the second intermediate period, 1650 to 1550 BCE, were times of social unrest, famine, and foreign invasion in Egypt. During these periods, agricultural systems may have collapsed, and knowledge of how to cultivate specific wheat varieties may have been lost. Whatever the reason, the disappearance of this wheat variety represents a loss, not just of a plant, but of agricultural knowledge that took thousands of years to develop. It's a reminder that human history isn't a straight line of progress. It's a series of gains and losses, innovations and abandonments, discoveries and forgettings. The wheat found in Khufu's pyramid is a ghost, a remnant of a lost agricultural tradition that once sustained one of the world's greatest civilizations. So why hasn't this discovery been announced to the public? The answer lies in the rigorous standards of scientific publishing. The Zurich team has submitted their findings to Nature Plants, one of the most prestigious journals in the field of plant science. But the peer review process is slow and meticulous. Reviewers have asked for additional analyses, more samples, and further verification before they will recommend publication. The team is currently working on a follow-up study that will analyze wheat DNA from other Old Kingdom sites across Egypt, hoping to trace the geographic distribution and temporal range of this unique variety. They're also collaborating with archaeologists in Sudan, Libya, and Morocco to see if similar wheat varieties existed in other parts of North Africa. This work takes time. It requires funding, permissions, and careful coordination across multiple institutions and countries. And even after the paper is published, the scientific community will need time to digest the findings, replicate the results, and incorporate them into existing models of agricultural history. This isn't secrecy, it's science. And science moves at its own pace, deliberate, cautious, and evidence-based. The team is acutely aware of the potential impact of their discovery. They know that if their findings are correct, they will challenge long-held assumptions about the origins of agriculture and the development of ancient Egyptian civilization. They also know that such challenges invite scrutiny and sometimes criticism. That's why they're being so careful. They want to make sure their evidence is unassailable before they present it to the world. As Dr. Lena Schmidt, the lead geneticist on the project, explained in a recent interview, this isn't about being first. It's about being right. If we're wrong, we could set the field back years. If we're right, we could open up entirely new avenues of research. The stakes are too high to rush. But the implications of this discovery extend beyond academic debates about agricultural history. They touch on deeper questions about human innovation, adaptation, and resilience. The story of wheat domestication is, in many ways, the story of human civilization. Agriculture allowed humans to settle in one place, to build cities, to develop specialized crafts and professions, to create art and literature and religion. It was the foundation upon which everything else was built. And for decades, that story has been told as a linear progression, from hunting and gathering to farming, from nomadic tribes to settled societies, from simple tools to complex civilizations. But the wheat found in Khufu's pyramid suggests that the story is more complex. It suggests that different societies may have developed agriculture independently, adapting plants to their local environments in unique ways. It suggests that knowledge was lost as well as gained, that civilizations rose and fell, taking their innovations with them. And it suggests that the past is always more nuanced, more surprising than we imagine. This isn't just about wheat. It's about humility. It's a reminder that even after centuries of archaeological research, even with all our modern technology and scientific methods, there are still discoveries waiting to be made. Discoveries that can challenge our most basic assumptions about human history. The wheat in Khufu's pyramid is one such discovery. It's a tiny fragment of organic material, barely visible to the naked eye. But it contains a story of ancient farmers who understood plant genetics long before Mendel, who adapted crops to their environment long before modern agronomy, who built a civilization on the foundation of agriculture. And when that story is finally told, it will change the way we think about the past, and perhaps the way we approach the future. The Zurich team expects their paper to be published in late 2025 or early 2026. After that, the real work begins. Archaeologists will search for evidence of this wheat variety in other sites across Egypt and North Africa. Geneticists will work to reconstruct the full genome of the ancient wheat, potentially even attempting to revive it through selective breeding or genetic engineering. Historians will re-examine ancient Egyptian texts and artifacts for references to this lost crop. And the public will learn about a discovery that has been hidden not by conspiracy, but by the slow, careful process of scientific verification. When that happens, the wheat in Khufu's pyramid will take its place alongside other great archaeological discoveries that have reshaped our understanding of human history. It won't be as dramatic as the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. It won't be as visually striking as the unearthing of a lost city. But in its own quiet way, it will be just as important, because it reminds us that the past is always full of surprises, and that sometimes the most revolutionary discoveries come not from grand monuments, but from tiny grains of wheat hidden in ancient mortar. 30 meters beneath the turquoise waters of Abu Qir Bay, just east of Alexandria, lies a city that vanished without a trace for over 1,000 years. Its streets, temples, and harbors were swallowed by the Mediterranean Sea sometime in the 8th century CE, erased from memory so completely that historians debated whether it had ever existed. Ancient texts mentioned it, Herodotus described its grandeur, Strabo noted its strategic importance, but no one could find it. Maps showed only open water where the city should have been. For centuries, Thonis-Heracleion was considered a legend, a place that existed only in the pages of classical literature. Then, in 2000, French underwater archaeologist Franck Gaudiot and his team from the European Institute of Underwater Archaeology made a discovery that rewrote the history of the Nile Delta. Using nuclear magnetic resonance magnetometers and side-scan sonar, they detected massive stone structures buried beneath meters of sand and silt. What they found was staggering: a complete ancient city, perfectly preserved by the sea. Statues of pharaohs and gods, some weighing over 7 tons. The remains of a grand temple dedicated to Ammonius-Jerub. A network of canals and harbors that once served as Egypt's gateway to the Mediterranean. Gold coins, jewelry, ritual artifacts, shipwrecks, and inscriptions in both Egyptian hieroglyphs and Greek script. Thonis-Heracleion was real, and it was far more magnificent than anyone had imagined. But the 2000 discovery was only the beginning. In 2023 and 2024, new sonar surveys revealed something even more extraordinary. Entire quarters of the city that had never been explored, residential districts, marketplaces, industrial zones, and what appears to be a second major temple complex lying deeper beneath the seabed. These newly discovered sections could double the known size of the city. Yet despite their potential to revolutionize our understanding of Greco-Egyptian civilization, Egyptian authorities have not rushed to excavate them. No international press conferences, no documentary film crews, no dramatic announcements, just quiet, deliberate caution. This isn't a cover-up. It's a calculation, one that weighs scientific value against financial reality, preservation against exposure, and national heritage against the relentless pressure of tourism and media spectacle. To understand why Thonis-Heracleion matters, we must first understand its historical significance. The city existed at a unique crossroads of time, culture, and geography. Founded sometime in the 8th century BCE, it served as Egypt's primary Mediterranean port for over 1,000 years, long before Alexandria existed. All trade between Egypt and the Greek world passed through Thonis-Heracleion. Grain, papyrus, and gold flowed out. Olive oil, wine, and silver flowed in. The city was so important that it had 2 names: Thonis to the Egyptians, Heracleion to the Greeks, a linguistic duality that reflected its role as a bridge between civilizations. It was here that Egyptian pharaohs welcomed Greek traders, diplomats, and mercenaries. It was here that the cult of Osiris merged with Greek religious practices. It was here that the famous ceremony of the Mysteries of Osiris took place each year, drawing pilgrims from across the Mediterranean. And it was here, according to ancient sources, that Helen of Troy and Paris stopped during their flight from Sparta, a detail that may be mythological, but speaks to the city's legendary status in the ancient imagination. The city's destruction was as dramatic as its existence. Sometime in the 8th century CE, a combination of factors, rising sea levels, soil liquefaction caused by earthquakes, and the gradual sinking of the Nile Delta's soft clay foundations, caused the city to collapse into the sea. The process was likely sudden and catastrophic. Buildings crumbled, statues toppled, streets flooded. Within hours or days, Thonis-Heracleion vanished beneath the waves, taking its secrets with it. For over a millennium, it lay forgotten, its location lost even to local fishermen. The sea that had destroyed it also preserved it. Sealed beneath layers of sand and silt, protected from oxygen and human interference, the city remained frozen in time, a time capsule of Greco-Egyptian civilization. Franck Gaudiot's discovery in 2000 was a triumph of technology and persistence. For years, Gaudio had been searching the waters off Alexandria, guided by ancient texts and geological surveys. He knew that the Nile Delta's coastline had shifted dramatically over the past 2 millennia due to sediment deposition and rising sea levels. Cities that once stood on dry land were now submerged, but finding them required more than guesswork. It required technology capable of seeing through meters of seabed sediment. Gaudio's team used a technique called nuclear magnetic resonance, NMR, magnetometry, which detects variations in the Earth's magnetic field caused by buried ferrous objects and stone structures. They also employed side-scan sonar, which creates detailed images of the seafloor by bouncing sound waves off its surface. By combining these technologies with historical records and geological data, they pinpointed a location in Abu Qir Bay where the magnetic anomalies were too large and too regular to be natural formations. When divers descended to investigate, they found themselves swimming through the ruins of a vast ancient city. The scale of the discovery was unprecedented. Over the next 2 decades, Gaudio's team, working in partnership with Egypt's Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities, uncovered over 150 artifacts of exceptional importance. A colossal statue of the god Hapi, guardian of the Nile's flood, a stele inscribed with a decree of Pharaoh Nectanebo I that confirmed the city's dual Egyptian-Greek identity, 64 ancient shipwrecks, the largest collection of ancient vessels ever found in a single location, and thousands of gold coins, jewelry pieces, and ritual objects. Each season of excavation revealed new wonders, but each season also revealed new challenges. Underwater archaeology is slow, expensive, and physically demanding. Divers can work only a few hours each day, limited by depth, currents, and decompression requirements. Every artifact must be carefully documented, photographed, and mapped before removal. Many objects are so fragile that they must be encased in protective plaster jackets underwater before being lifted to the surface. Once recovered, artifacts require years of conservation, desalination, stabilization, cleaning, before they can be displayed or studied. The process is meticulous. A single excavation season might yield only a handful of major finds, despite weeks or months of work, and the costs are staggering. A single season of underwater excavation can cost over $2 million, funding that must come from private donors, foundations, or government grants. Gaudio's work has been supported primarily by the Hilti Foundation, a Swiss philanthropic organization that has committed millions of dollars to the project over 2 decades. But even with this support, the pace of discovery has been necessarily slow. Only an estimated 5% of the city has been excavated. The remaining 95%, including the newly discovered quarters, awaits future exploration. The new discoveries of 2023 and 2024 came not from diving, but from advanced remote sensing. A joint Egyptian-European team deployed autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, equipped with multi-beam sonar and sub-bottom profilers, devices that can penetrate up to 10 meters beneath the seabed to map buried structures. The results were astonishing. Beyond the already excavated central district, the AUVs detected the outlines of an entire residential quarter, streets laid out in a grid pattern, foundations of houses built from mud brick and limestone, courtyards, and what appear to be workshops or industrial spaces. Further east, they found evidence of a large marketplace, a rectangular plaza surrounded by what seemed to be stall foundations and storage areas. And most intriguingly, in the deepest surveyed area, they detected the foundations of a second major temple complex, possibly dedicated to the goddess Isis based on preliminary magnetic signatures that matched known temple layouts elsewhere in Egypt. The newly discovered areas could double the known size of Thonis-Heracleion. They could reveal how ordinary people lived, their homes, their work, their daily routines, in a way that the grand temples and harbors of the central district cannot. They could provide evidence of trade networks, craft specialization, social hierarchy, and cultural exchange that would transform our understanding of life in Greco-Roman Egypt. But despite the potential of these discoveries, Egyptian authorities have not announced plans for immediate excavation. Why? The reasons are practical, financial, and ethical, not conspiratorial. First, there is the issue of funding. Underwater archaeology is expensive, as noted earlier. But excavating the newly discovered quarters would be even more costly than previous work. The residential district lies in deeper water, up to 40 meters below the surface, requiring specialized diving equipment, longer decompression times, and greater safety precautions. The industrial zone appears to be buried under thicker layers of sediment, requiring dredging equipment that could disturb the delicate archaeological context if not used with extreme care. And the second temple complex sits in an area with strong currents that make diving hazardous for much of the year. Excavating these areas would require a multi-year commitment of funding, tens of millions of dollars, far beyond what the Hilti Foundation or other current donors have pledged. Egypt's Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities has other priorities. The country is investing heavily in land-based archaeological projects, the Grand Egyptian Museum near the Giza Plateau, the restoration of Karnak Temple, the development of new sites in Luxor and Aswan. These projects generate immediate tourism revenue and international prestige. Underwater archaeology, by contrast, yields discoveries that are difficult to display, challenging to conserve, and invisible to the average tourist. The artifacts from Thonis-Heracleion are stunning, but they sit in conservation labs for years before reaching museums. The site itself cannot be visited except by trained divers. From a purely economic perspective, land-based projects offer better returns on investment. This isn't cynicism, it's reality. Egypt's archaeological budget is finite. Choices must be made, and those choices reflect not just scientific value, but practical considerations of cost, visibility, and revenue generation. Second, there is the issue of preservation. Paradoxically, the best way to preserve an underwater site is often to leave it buried. Once exposed, artifacts begin to deteriorate rapidly. Salt water that has preserved objects for centuries can become destructive when combined with oxygen exposure. Organic materials like wood, papyrus, and textiles can disintegrate within hours of being brought to the surface if not immediately stabilized. Even stone and metal objects require careful conservation to prevent salt crystallization, corrosion, and biological growth. Egypt has world-class conservation facilities, but they are already overwhelmed with artifacts from ongoing land excavations. The Grand Egyptian Museum alone will house over 100,000 objects, many requiring active conservation. Adding thousands of waterlogged artifacts from Thonis-Heracleion would strain resources to the breaking point. The ministry knows this. They've seen what happens when sites are excavated faster than conservation capacity can handle. In the 1980s and 1990s, rushed excavations at several delta sites resulted in the loss of irreplaceable organic artifacts. Wooden statues that crumbled to dust, papyrus scrolls that turned to mush, textile fragments that disintegrated before conservators could reach them. The lesson was learned the hard way. Excavation without conservation is destruction. For Thonis-Heracleion's newly discovered quarters, the ministry has adopted a policy of preservation by non-intervention. The sites will remain buried until Egypt has the conservation infrastructure, trained personnel, and financial resources to handle the artifacts properly. This is not neglect. It is responsible stewardship. As Dr. Mostafa Waziri, Secretary General of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, explained in a 2024 interview, every artifact we bring to the surface is a promise we make to future generations. We promise to preserve it, to study it, to share it. If we cannot keep that promise, we should not make it. The sea has protected these objects for 1,200 years. It can protect them for 1,200 more until we are ready. Third, there is the issue of context. Underwater archaeology isn't just about recovering beautiful objects. It's about understanding how those objects relate to each other, how a house connects to a street, how a workshop relates to a marketplace, how religious spaces interact with domestic ones. This contextual understanding requires systematic, area-by-area excavation, not treasure hunting. Rushing to excavate the newly discovered temple complex, for example, might yield spectacular statues and inscriptions. But without first excavating the surrounding residential and commercial districts, archaeologists would lack the context to interpret those finds. Was the temple a neighborhood shrine or a city-wide pilgrimage site? Who worshipped there, elites or commoners? How did it relate to the main Amunias-Jareb temple in the central district? These questions can only be answered through careful, methodical excavation that respects spatial relationships. The ministry and Gaudio's team have agreed on a phased approach. First, map the entire city using remote sensing. Second, conduct small-scale test excavations in key areas to assess preservation conditions and artifact density. Third, develop detailed excavation plans for each district based on those test results. Fourth, secure long-term funding and conservation capacity before beginning full-scale excavation. This approach will take decades, but it will yield a far richer, more nuanced understanding of Thonis-Heracleion than any rushed treasure hunt could provide. As Gaudio himself has stated, "We are not looters. We are not treasure hunters. We are archaeologists. And archaeology is the slow, patient work of listening to what the past has to tell us, not shouting questions and grabbing whatever answers we can find." But there's another, more subtle reason for the cautious approach: the politics of underwater cultural heritage. Thonis-Heracleion lies in Egyptian territorial waters, but its significance extends far beyond Egypt's borders. The city was a hub of Greco-Egyptian interaction, a place where Greek and Egyptian cultures blended, borrowed, and transformed each other. Artifacts from the site have implications for the history of Greece, Rome, Phoenicia, and the entire Mediterranean world. This international significance creates both opportunities and complications. On one hand, it attracts funding and expertise from foreign institutions. Gaudio's team includes archaeologists from France, Germany, Italy, and the United Kingdom. Conservation work has been supported by laboratories in Switzerland, the Netherlands, and the United States. This international collaboration has been essential to the project's success. On the other hand, it raises sensitive questions about ownership, credit, and control. Who owns the discoveries? The Egyptian government that controls the territory, or the international team that funds and executes the excavations? Who gets to publish the results first? Who decides how artifacts are displayed and interpreted? These questions have sparked tensions in underwater archaeology projects around the world. Egypt has been particularly sensitive to issues of cultural sovereignty since the colonial era, when European powers removed countless artifacts from the country, many of which remain in foreign museums today. The ministry is determined not to repeat those mistakes. Every artifact recovered from Thonis-Heracleion remains in Egypt. Every publication must include Egyptian co-authors. Every major decision requires approval from Egyptian authorities. This insistence on sovereignty slows the pace of work. Negotiations take time, approvals require bureaucracy, but it ensures that Egypt retains control over its own heritage. And in an era of growing demands for the repatriation of looted artifacts, this control matters more than ever. So when will the newly discovered quarters of Thonis-Heracleion be excavated? The official timeline is deliberately vague. Ministry officials speak of phased exploration over the next 2 decades, with test excavations in the residential district possibly beginning in 2027 or 2028, followed by larger-scale work in the 2030s, if funding and conservation capacity allow. The second temple complex may not be excavated until the 2040s or later. This timeline frustrates some archaeologists who argue that climate change and rising sea levels pose an urgent threat to underwater sites. They worry that waiting decades could mean losing artifacts forever to erosion, looting, or environmental degradation. These concerns are valid. Abu Qir Bay is subject to increasing storm activity and coastal erosion linked to climate change. Each winter storm shifts sediments, potentially exposing buried artifacts to damage or destruction. And while the Egyptian Navy patrols the area to prevent looting, the vastness of the underwater site makes complete protection impossible. But the ministry's position is that rushed excavation poses a greater risk than patient waiting. Better to leave artifacts buried for another decade than to recover them only to watch them disintegrate in underfunded conservation labs. Better to develop sustainable, long-term strategies than to chase short-term headlines. This philosophy reflects a broader shift in archaeology worldwide, from extraction to preservation, from spectacle to stewardship, from individual glory to collective responsibility. Thonis-Heracleion is not a treasure chest to be plundered. It is a library of human history, with pages that can be read only once. Each excavation season turns a few pages, The rest must wait until we have the wisdom to read them properly. The sunken city of Thonis-Heracleion teaches us something profound about time and patience. For over 1,000 years, it lay hidden beneath the waves, its secrets kept not by conspiracy, but by geography and geology. Its rediscovery required not just technology, but persistence, decades of searching, mapping, and interpreting. And its full revelation will require even more patience, decades of careful excavation, conservation, and study. In an age of instant gratification, where information is expected to be available at the click of a button, this slow pace feels almost radical. But some things cannot be rushed. Some secrets are too fragile, too complex, too precious to be hurried into the light. The residential streets of Thonis-Heracleion hold stories of ordinary people, merchants, artisans, priests, sailors, who lived, worked, and worshipped in a city that bridged two civilizations. Their stories deserve to be told correctly, not quickly. The Second Temple complex may contain inscriptions that rewrite our understanding of Greco-Egyptian religion. Those inscriptions deserve to be read in context, not torn from their setting for dramatic effect. The industrial workshops may reveal technologies lost to history. Those technologies deserve to be understood fully, not reduced to sound bites. Thonis-Heracleion has waited 1,200 years to be rediscovered. It can wait a few more decades to be understood. And when that understanding finally comes, it will be richer, deeper, and more meaningful for the patience that made it possible. The sea kept its secrets well. We owe it the same care in revealing them. In the Valley of the Kings, where pharaohs of the New Kingdom built elaborate tombs to ensure their passage to the afterlife, one burial has confounded archaeologists for over a century. Designated KV 55, this modest tomb was discovered in 1907 by Edward R. Ayrton, a British archaeologist working for American financier Theodore M. Davis. Unlike the grand tombs of Tutankhamun or Ramesses II, KV 55 was small, poorly preserved, and seemingly insignificant. Its single chamber contained a jumbled collection of artifacts, a desecrated coffin, a badly damaged mummy, canopic jars, magical bricks, and various funerary objects bearing the names of multiple royal figures. At first glance, it appeared to be little more than a cache of discarded burial equipment. But as archaeologists began to study the contents more carefully, they realized they had stumbled upon one of the most controversial and politically sensitive discoveries in Egyptian archaeology. The coffin bore the name of Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh who abandoned Egypt's traditional gods in favor of worshipping the sun disk Aten. The magical bricks carried the name of his mother, Queen Tai. The canopic jars belonged to his secondary wife, Kia, and the mummy itself, though badly damaged and desecrated, appeared to be that of a young man who died in his 20s or 30s, precisely the age Akhenaten would have been at his death. But here's where the mystery deepens. Subsequent analysis has cast doubt on every aspect of this identification. The coffin was clearly altered from a female to a male burial. The mummy's skeletal features don't perfectly match artistic depictions of Akhenaten. And the tomb's location, construction style, and contents suggest it may have been used for a different purpose entirely, perhaps as a temporary resting place for royal mummies during a period of political upheaval. For over a century, KV 55 has been at the center of fierce academic debates. Was the mummy Akhenaten? His successor Sphinx? His son Tutankhamun? Or someone else entirely? The answers matter more than you might think. They could rewrite our understanding of one of ancient Egypt's most turbulent periods, the Amarna era, when Akhenaten's religious revolution threatened to tear the kingdom apart. They could clarify the relationships between some of Egypt's most famous pharaohs. And they could shed light on the political machinations that followed Akhenaten's death, machinations that may have involved erasing his memory from history. But despite decades of study, despite advances in forensic science and DNA analysis, the mystery of KV 55 remains unresolved. Why? Because the Egyptian government has been deliberately cautious about releasing definitive results. This isn't a cover-up. It's a recognition that some questions are too important to answer hastily. To understand why KV 55 matters, we must first understand the historical context of the Amarna period. In the 14th century BCE, during the reign of Amenhotep III, Egypt was at the height of its power and prosperity. The kingdom stretched from Nubia in the south to Syria in the north. Its economy was robust, its military formidable, its religious institutions deeply entrenched. Amenhotep III ruled for nearly 4 decades, presiding over a golden age of art, architecture, and international diplomacy. But his son, who ascended the throne as Amenhotep IV, would shatter this stability. Early in his reign, Amenhotep IV began promoting the worship of Aten, the sun disk, above all other gods. He built temples to Aten at Karnak, alongside the traditional temples of Ammonius. He changed his name to Akhenaten, effective for Aten, and he began a systematic campaign to erase the name and image of Ammonius, Egypt's chief deity, from temples and monuments across the kingdom. This was more than religious reform. It was cultural revolution. Akhenaten abandoned Thebes, the traditional religious capital, and built a new city called Akhenaten, modern Amarna, dedicated to Aten. He promoted a new artistic style that depicted the royal family with elongated faces, narrow shoulders, and exaggerated hips, a style so distinctive that some scholars have speculated it reflects a genetic disorder or deliberate androgyny. He centralized power in his own hands, sidelining the powerful priesthood of Ammonius that had dominated Egyptian politics for centuries. And he appears to have neglected Egypt's foreign affairs, allowing vassal states in Syria and Palestine to fall to rival powers. The Amarna period was brief, lasting only about 17 years, but its impact was profound. When Akhenaten died, his successors moved quickly to restore the old order. His son Tutankhamun, originally Tutankhaten, changed his name back to honor Ammonius. The court returned to Thebes. The temples of Ammonius were restored, and a systematic campaign of damnatio memoriae, condemnation of memory, erased Akhenaten's name and image from official records. His monuments were dismantled. His statues were destroyed. His name was omitted from king lists. For centuries, Akhenaten was known only as the heretic of Amarna, a pharaoh so reviled that later generations refused to acknowledge his existence. It wasn't until the late 19th century, with the discovery of the Amarna site and the decipherment of its archives, that Akhenaten's story began to emerge from the shadows. And it wasn't until the discovery of KV 55 that archaeologists found what they believed might be his physical remains. The discovery of KV 55 in 1907 was initially dismissed as unimportant. The tomb was small, just a single chamber carved into the rock, with no decorations or inscriptions on its walls. The entrance was hidden beneath debris from the nearby tomb of Ramesses IX, suggesting it had been deliberately concealed. Inside, Ayrton found a chaotic scene. The coffin had been smashed and desecrated, its face and hands torn off, its inscriptions partially erased. The mummy inside was in even worse condition, wrapped in a shroud but not properly mummified. The body had been damaged by moisture and time. The skull was separated from the spine. The ribs were broken. The pelvis was crushed. Surrounding the coffin were canopic jars, containers for internal organs, that had been smashed open, their contents scattered. Magical bricks, ritual objects placed at the 4 corners of a tomb to protect the deceased, lay broken on the floor. And scattered throughout the chamber were various funerary objects, a gilded shrine, furniture fragments, pottery, and jewelry. At first glance, it appeared to be a hasty burial, perhaps of a minor royal figure or a cache of discarded equipment. But as Ayrton and Davis began to examine the artifacts more carefully, they realized something extraordinary. The coffin, though damaged, bore traces of a royal cartouche, the name of Akhenaten. The magical bricks carried the name of Queen Tai, Akhenaten's mother. The canopic jars belonged to Kia, one of Akhenaten's secondary wives. And the style of the artifacts, the gilded shrine, the furniture, the pottery, all dated to the late 18th dynasty, precisely the period of Akhenaten's reign. The implications were staggering. Could this be the tomb of Akhenaten himself? The idea was tantalizing. Akhenaten's burial place had never been found. Ancient sources suggested he was buried at Amarna, but no tomb matching his status had been discovered there. If KV 55 contained his remains, it would be one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. But there were problems with this identification. The coffin was clearly designed for a woman. It had been altered, with the original female pronouns and titles changed to male ones. The mummy, though young, didn't perfectly match artistic depictions of Akhenaten, which showed him with an elongated skull, narrow shoulders, and a prominent belly. And the tomb's location in the Valley of the Kings, far from Amarna, suggested the body had been moved there after Akhenaten's death, perhaps during the restoration of traditional religion under Tutankhamun. These inconsistencies led some scholars to propose alternative identifications. Perhaps the mummy was Smenkhare, a mysterious pharaoh who may have briefly succeeded Akhenaten. Or perhaps it was Tutankhamun himself, buried hastily before his proper tomb, KV62, was ready. Or perhaps it was someone else entirely, a royal family member whose identity had been lost to history. The debate raged for decades, with scholars on all sides presenting compelling arguments but no definitive proof. The first major breakthrough came in 1995, when a team of forensic anthropologists led by Dr. Fawzia Hussain re-examined the KV55 mummy using modern techniques. They conducted a detailed skeletal analysis, measuring bone lengths, examining joint surfaces, and assessing dental wear. Their conclusions were surprising. The mummy was male, as previously thought, but younger than earlier estimates had suggested, probably between 18 and 25 years old at death, not in his 30s or 40s as some scholars had claimed. The skeletal features didn't show signs of the genetic disorders that had been proposed to explain Akhenaten's unusual artistic depictions, such as Marfan syndrome or Frolic syndrome. And the skull shape, while somewhat elongated, fell within the range of normal variation for ancient Egyptian males. These findings cast serious doubt on the identification of the mummy as Akhenaten, who was believed to have ruled for 17 years and fathered at least 6 daughters. A man who died in his early 20s simply wouldn't have had time to accomplish everything attributed to Akhenaten. But the study also raised new questions. If the mummy wasn't Akhenaten, who was it? And why was it buried in a coffin bearing Akhenaten's name? The answer, some scholars suggested, might lie in the political turmoil that followed Akhenaten's death. When Tutankhamun restored the traditional religion, he may have ordered the reburial of Akhenaten's family members in the Valley of the Kings, away from the heretical city of Amarna. The KV55 tomb could have been a temporary cache for royal mummies being moved from Amarna to Thebes. The desecration of the coffin and mummy could have been the work of priests or officials who still harbored resentment toward Akhenaten's religious revolution. Or it could have been the result of tomb robbers who broke in centuries later, seeking valuable grave goods. The mystery deepened further in 2010, when a team led by Dr. Zahi Hawass conducted DNA analysis on the KV55 mummy and several other royal mummies from the 18th dynasty. The results, published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, were groundbreaking. The KV55 mummy was identified as the son of Amenhotep III and Queen Tai, the biological father of Tutankhamun. This confirmed that the mummy was indeed a royal prince, and almost certainly Akhenaten, since Smenkhare's parentage was unknown and Tutankhamun was too young to be his own father. But the age estimate remained problematic. The DNA study suggested the mummy died between 35 and 45 years old enough to be Akhenaten, but inconsistent with the skeletal analysis that had estimated his age at death as 18 to 25. The discrepancy sparked fierce debate among scholars. Some argued that the skeletal analysis had been flawed, perhaps because the mummy's poor condition made accurate age estimation difficult. Others suggested that the DNA results, while confirming the mummy's royal lineage, didn't definitively prove it was Akhenaten. After all, Amenhotep III and Tai had multiple sons, and the identity of the KV55 mummy could still be Smenkhare or another lesser-known prince. The debate remained unresolved. And then, in 2023, a new development added another layer of complexity to the mystery. In late 2023, a team of geneticists from Cairo University and the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History in Germany began a new round of DNA analysis on the KV55 mummy and related royal remains. This time, they were using next-generation sequencing technology that could extract more complete genetic information from ancient, degraded samples. They were also employing new techniques to estimate age at death more accurately, based on epigenetic markers, chemical modifications to DNA that change predictably with age. The preliminary results, shared privately with Egyptian authorities in early 2024, were both confirming and confusing. The genetic analysis confirmed beyond doubt that the KV-55 mummy was the son of Amenhotep III in Tai and the father of Tutankhamun. The epigenetic age estimation placed his death at approximately 38 to 42 years old, consistent with the 2010 DNA study and old enough to be Akhenaten. But here's where things get complicated. The new analysis also revealed something unexpected. The KV-55 mummy shared a significant amount of genetic material with the mummy known as the Younger Lady, KV-35YL, found in the cache tomb of Amenhotep II. Previous studies had identified the Younger Lady as Tutankhamun's mother and a daughter of Amenhotep III and Tai, making her both the sister and wife of the KV-55 mummy. This wasn't surprising in itself. Royal incest was common in ancient Egypt. But the new analysis revealed something more. The Younger Lady's DNA showed markers associated with a rare genetic condition that affects bone development and could explain some of the unusual physical features depicted in Amarna art. This finding has reignited the debate about whether Akhenaten, if he is indeed the KV-55 mummy, suffered from a genetic disorder that influenced both his physical appearance and his religious beliefs. Some scholars have long speculated that Akhenaten's monotheistic revolution was inspired by a medical condition, perhaps a hormonal disorder that caused feminine features or a neurological condition that produced mystical experiences. The new DNA evidence doesn't prove this theory, but it makes it more plausible. More controversially, the preliminary results also suggest that the KV-55 mummy may have had genetic markers associated with increased susceptibility to certain infectious diseases, possibly explaining his relatively early death. But these findings are still preliminary. The full study has not yet been peer-reviewed or published, and Egyptian authorities have been deliberately cautious about releasing details to the public. Why? Because the implications of this research extend far beyond academic debate. They touch on sensitive issues of royal lineage, religious history, and even modern Egyptian identity. The political and cultural stakes of the KV-55 mystery are higher than many people realize. Akhenaten remains one of the most controversial figures in Egyptian history. To some, he was a visionary religious reformer who anticipated monotheism centuries before Judaism and Christianity. To others, he was a tyrant who destabilized Egypt and neglected his people. To still others, he was a heretic whose memory should remain erased. These interpretations aren't just academic. They reflect deeper tensions in how Egypt, and the world, understands its own history. For much of the 20th century, Western scholars dominated the study of ancient Egypt, often interpreting its history through colonial or Eurocentric lenses. Akhenaten was frequently portrayed as a proto-Christian or enlightened monotheist, a figure who transcended his time and culture. This interpretation appealed to Western audiences, but often ignored the complex religious and political context of ancient Egypt. In recent decades, Egyptian scholars have pushed back against these interpretations, emphasizing the indigenous roots of Egyptian civilization and rejecting attempts to appropriate Akhenaten as a precursor to Western religious traditions. This shift has made the KV-55 mystery even more sensitive. Identifying the mummy as Akhenaten, or not, has implications for how his legacy is understood. If he suffered from a genetic disorder, does that diminish his religious achievements? If he was healthy but chose monotheism deliberately, does that make him more admirable or more dangerous? These questions don't have easy answers, and Egyptian authorities are acutely aware that any announcement about KV-55 will be interpreted through multiple, often conflicting, lenses. There's also the issue of tourism and national prestige. The Valley of the Kings is one of Egypt's most important tourist attractions, drawing millions of visitors each year. A definitive identification of the KV-55 mummy as Akhenaten could generate enormous publicity and boost tourism. But it could also spark controversy, both within Egypt, where some conservative Muslims view the veneration of pharaohs as problematic, and internationally, where debates about Akhenaten's legacy remain heated. The Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities has learned from past experiences. In 2010, when the DNA results on Tutankhamun and related mummies were announced, the press conference was a media circus. Headlines around the world proclaimed King Tut's parents identified and Akhenaten's mummy found. but many of the claims were oversimplified or misinterpreted. Some media outlets suggested that Tutankhamun suffered from a long list of genetic disorders based on speculative interpretations of the DNA data. Others claimed that Akhenaten's monotheism was caused by a medical condition, a theory that many scholars found reductive and offensive. The ministry doesn't want a repeat of that experience. This time, they're taking a more cautious approach. The full results of the 2023 to 2024 DNA study will be published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal first, allowing scholars to evaluate the evidence before it reaches the public. Only after the academic community has had time to digest the findings will the ministry make a formal announcement. And even then, the announcement will be carefully worded to avoid sensationalism or oversimplification. As Dr. Khaled El-Anani, former Minister of Tourism and Antiquities, explained in a 2024 interview, "This is not just about one mummy. It's about how we understand an entire period of Egyptian history. We have a responsibility to get it right, not just for science, but for Egypt's cultural heritage and for the world's understanding of our civilization." But there's another reason for the caution: the condition of the KV-55 mummy itself. The mummy is in poor shape. It was damaged by ancient tomb robbers, by moisture infiltration over centuries, and by early 20th century handling that didn't meet modern conservation standards. The skull is separated from the spine. The ribs are broken. The pelvis is crushed. Much of the soft tissue has deteriorated. This poor condition makes scientific analysis challenging. DNA extraction is difficult when samples are degraded. Age estimation is unreliable when bones are damaged. And any further handling of the mummy, whether for additional testing or for display, risks causing more damage. The Egyptian Museum in Cairo, where the KV-55 mummy has been housed since its discovery, has limited conservation facilities. The mummy is stored in a climate-controlled case, but the museum's aging infrastructure makes long-term preservation uncertain. Plans for the Grand Egyptian Museum, GM, set to open fully in 2025, include state-of-the-art conservation labs and display cases that could provide better protection for the KV-55 mummy and other royal remains. But until the GM is fully operational, the ministry is reluctant to subject the mummy to additional testing or public exposure. This caution reflects a broader shift in Egyptian archaeology, from extraction and display to preservation and protection. For much of the 20th century, the priority was to find and showcase spectacular artifacts. Mummies were unwrapped for public viewing. Tombs were open to tourists with little regard for their long-term preservation. But in recent decades, Egyptian authorities have adopted a more conservation-focused approach. They've restricted access to fragile sites. They've invested in climate-controlled storage and display facilities. And they've prioritized non-invasive research methods that don't damage artifacts. The KV-55 mummy is a test case for this new philosophy. It's too valuable and too fragile to be treated as a spectacle. It deserves careful, respectful study that prioritizes its long-term preservation over short-term publicity. As Dr. Mostafa Waziri, Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Antiquities, has stated, these mummies are not just scientific specimens. They are the remains of real people, kings and queens who shaped our history. We have a moral obligation to treat them with dignity and respect. That means moving slowly, carefully, and with humility. So when will we know the truth about KV-55? The timeline is uncertain. The peer review process for the 2023 to 2024 DNA study could take months or even years, depending on the complexity of the analysis and the rigor of the review. Once published, the findings will need to be evaluated by the broader academic community, debated, critiqued, and potentially replicated. Only after this process is complete will the Egyptian ministry make a formal announcement. Realistically, that could take until 2026 or 2027. And even then, the announcement may not provide definitive answers. Science rarely deals in certainties, especially when working with ancient, degraded samples. The KV-55 mystery may remain partially unresolved, with scholars continuing to debate the evidence for years to come. This uncertainty frustrates some people. They want clear, dramatic answers. They want to know, once and for all, whether the KV-55 mummy is Akhenaten. But archaeology doesn't work that way. The past is complex, messy, and often ambiguous. The evidence is fragmentary. The interpretations are contested. And sometimes, the most honest answer is, we don't know yet. This isn't failure. It's integrity. It's a recognition that some questions are too important to answer hastily, too complex to reduce to sound bites. The mystery of KV-55 isn't just about identifying a mummy. It's about understanding a pivotal moment in human history, the moment when one man tried to reshape an entire civilization around a new vision of divinity. It's about the tension between tradition and innovation, between orthodoxy and heresy, between power and belief. These are timeless questions, and they deserve thoughtful, careful answers, not rushed conclusions driven by media pressure or public curiosity. The KV-55 mummy has waited over a century for its story to be told. It can wait a little longer for that story to be told correctly. The tomb of KV-55 teaches us something profound about the nature of historical truth. For over a century, scholars have debated the identity of its occupant, marshaling evidence from archaeology, art history, linguistics, forensic science, and genetics. Each new discovery has shed light on the mystery, but also deepened its complexity. The coffin suggests one thing. The skeletal remains suggest another. The DNA evidence points in multiple directions. And the historical context, the political and religious turmoil of the Amarna period, adds layers of interpretation that no scientific test can fully resolve. This is the reality of historical research. Truth isn't a single, simple fact waiting to be uncovered. It's a mosaic of evidence, interpretation, and context, always incomplete, always open to revision. The KV-55 mystery embodies this complexity. It reminds us that history isn't a collection of settled facts, but a living, evolving conversation between past and present. And it challenges us to approach that conversation with humility, patience, and respect. The mummy in KV-55 was once a living, breathing person, a prince, a pharaoh, a revolutionary, a son, a father. He lived in a time of extraordinary change, when the foundations of Egyptian civilization were shaken to their core. He made choices that shaped the course of history, and he left behind a legacy that continues to fascinate, frustrate, and inspire us more than 3,000 years later. Whoever he was, Akhenaten, Sphinx, or someone else entirely, he deserves more than speculation and sensationalism. He deserves careful, respectful study that honors both the scientific evidence and the human story behind it. The Egyptian authorities understand this. Their caution isn't secrecy. It's stewardship. It's a commitment to getting the story right, even if that means waiting longer than we'd like. In an age of instant information and viral headlines, this patience feels almost radical. But some truths are worth waiting for. Some stories are too important to rush. The mystery of KV-55 has captivated scholars for over a century. It will continue to captivate us for centuries more. And when the full story is finally told, when the evidence has been carefully weighed, the interpretations thoughtfully considered, the context fully understood, it will be richer, deeper, and more meaningful for the patience that made it possible. The tomb has kept its secrets well. We owe it the same care in revealing them. Beneath the sun-baked streets of modern Luxor, beneath the temples of Karnak and Luxor, beneath the tombs of the Valley of the Kings, lies a hidden world that most tourists never see. It's a world of darkness and water, of tunnels carved through limestone and chambers hewn from living rock. For decades, archaeologists have known that ancient Egyptians built sophisticated underground water systems to sustain their cities, temples, and agricultural fields in the arid Nile Valley. But the full extent of these systems remained a mystery until recently. In 2022 and 2023, satellite-based radar imaging conducted by the European Space Agency's Sentinel-1 mission revealed something astonishing: a vast, interconnected network of underground water channels, reservoirs, and filtration systems stretching across the entire Theban plateau. The network covers an area of over 120 square kilometers, larger than the city of Luxor itself. It includes what appear to be massive underground reservoirs capable of holding millions of liters of water, intricate channel systems that follow precise geometric patterns, and what researchers believe may be ancient pumping stations or water-lifting mechanisms carved directly into the bedrock. These aren't simple wells or cisterns. They're evidence of hydraulic engineering on a scale that rivals the pyramids themselves, a testament to the ancient Egyptians' mastery of water management in one of the world's driest environments. But despite the significance of this discovery, Egyptian authorities have been deliberately cautious about publicizing it. No press conferences, no academic papers announcing the find, no invitations for international teams to investigate. Just quiet, deliberate silence. This isn't a cover-up. It's protection. The underground water systems of Luxor are among the most vulnerable archaeological treasures in Egypt, and revealing their location could trigger a wave of looting, vandalism, and irreversible damage that would destroy them forever. To understand why these underground water systems matter, we must first understand the environmental challenges faced by ancient Egyptians. The Nile Valley is a narrow strip of fertile land sandwiched between vast deserts. Rainfall is minimal, less than 25 millimeters per year in most areas. The only reliable source of water is the Nile River itself, which floods annually, depositing nutrient-rich silt on the surrounding fields. But this flooding is unpredictable. Some years, the flood is too weak, leading to drought and famine. Other years, it's too strong, destroying crops and settlements. Ancient Egyptians developed sophisticated strategies to manage this uncertainty. They built dikes and canals to control the floodwaters. They constructed basins to store water for the dry season. They developed irrigation techniques to distribute water efficiently across their fields. But these surface-level solutions weren't enough. To sustain large cities like Thebes, modern Luxor, with populations estimated at over 80,000 people at its peak, required a more reliable water source, one that wouldn't dry up during droughts or overflow during floods. That source was groundwater. The limestone bedrock beneath the Nile Valley contains vast aquifers, underground layers of water-bearing rock that store water from ancient rainfall and Nile seepage. Ancient Egyptians learned to tap into these aquifers through a combination of wells, tunnels, and underground channels. They dug vertical shafts hundreds of feet deep to reach the water table. They carved horizontal tunnels to connect multiple wells and distribute water across wide areas. They built underground reservoirs to store water for times of scarcity. And they developed sophisticated filtration systems, layers of sand, gravel, and charcoal to purify the water before use. These systems weren't just practical, they were sacred. Water was associated with the god Hapi, who personified the Nile's life-giving floods. Underground water sources were seen as connections to the underworld, the realm of Osiris, god of the afterlife. Temples often incorporated water features into their design, with underground channels feeding sacred lakes and ritual purification pools. The water systems of Luxor weren't just engineering projects. They were religious statements, a physical manifestation of the ancient Egyptians' belief in the interconnectedness of the natural and supernatural worlds. The discovery of the full extent of Luxor's underground water network came not from excavation, but from space. The European Space Agency's Sentinel-1 satellites use synthetic aperture radar, SAR, to image the Earth's surface day and night, regardless of cloud cover or darkness. SAR works by emitting microwave pulses toward the ground and measuring the time it takes for the signals to bounce back. Different materials reflect these signals differently. Solid rock returns a strong signal, while air-filled voids or water-saturated sediments return a weaker one. By analyzing these reflections over time, SER can detect subtle changes in the ground structure, changes that might indicate the presence of underground features. In 2022, a team of researchers from the University of Florence and Cairo University began using Sentinel-1 data to map subsurface features across the Theban plateau. Their initial goal was modest: to identify potential locations for undiscovered tombs or chambers that could be targeted for future excavation. But as they processed the data, they noticed something unexpected. The radar signals showed consistent patterns of low reflectivity, indicating voids or water-saturated zones, stretching across vast areas of the plateau. These patterns weren't random. They followed precise geometric alignments, often intersecting at right angles or forming circular patterns around known temple complexes. When the team overlaid the radar data with existing archaeological maps, the correlations were striking. The underground features aligned perfectly with known wells, cisterns, and water channels documented by earlier archaeologists. But they also revealed entirely new features: massive underground reservoirs near the Karnak temple complex, extensive tunnel networks connecting the Valley of the Kings to the Nile floodplain, and what appeared to be a series of step chambers that might have functioned as ancient water-lifting stations. The scale of the discovery was staggering. The underground water network covered over 120 square kilometers, far larger than anyone had imagined. It included at least 7 major reservoirs, each capable of holding millions of liters of water. It featured hundreds of kilometers of tunnels and channels, some large enough for a person to walk through. And it showed evidence of sophisticated engineering techniques, gradient calculations, pressure management systems, and filtration mechanisms that would have required advanced mathematical and hydrological knowledge. This wasn't just a collection of wells. It was a unified water management system, a hydraulic infrastructure that rivaled the most advanced engineering projects of the ancient world. But here's the problem. The moment this discovery becomes public knowledge, it becomes vulnerable. Luxor is one of the most heavily looted archaeological regions in the world. Despite the presence of police, military patrols, and UNESCO monitoring, illegal excavations occur regularly. Local looters, often poor farmers or unemployed youth, dig unauthorized tunnels and shafts in search of artifacts they can sell on the black market. Organized crime syndicates employ teams of diggers, using heavy machinery and advanced detection equipment to locate valuable tombs and caches. International smuggling networks transport looted artifacts out of Egypt, often through neighboring countries like Sudan or Libya, before selling them to collectors in Europe, North America, and Asia. The market for Egyptian antiquities is enormous. A single intact statue can fetch hundreds of thousands of dollars. A well-preserved mummy can sell for millions. Even small artifacts, pottery shards, jewelry fragments, amulets, can generate significant income for impoverished communities. This economic incentive drives a relentless cycle of looting that has destroyed countless archaeological sites across Egypt. The underground water systems of Luxor are particularly vulnerable to this threat. Unlike tombs or temples, which are often protected by guards or located in monitored areas, the water tunnels and reservoirs are hidden beneath the ground, invisible to casual observers. Their entrances, if they still exist, are likely concealed or collapsed, making them difficult to find without precise coordinates. But once those coordinates become public, looters will descend on the area like vultures. They'll dig shafts to reach the tunnels. They'll blast through rock with explosives. They'll remove any artifacts they find, pottery, tools, inscriptions, without documenting their context or preserving their integrity. And in the process, they'll destroy the very structures they're seeking to exploit. The tunnels could collapse. The reservoirs could flood. The delicate filtration systems could be damaged beyond repair. The archaeological information contained within these structures, the inscriptions, the tool marks, the construction techniques, would be lost forever. This isn't speculation. It's history. In the 1990s, when satellite imagery revealed potential tomb locations in the Valley of the Monkeys, a remote area west of the Valley of the Kings, looters quickly targeted the sites. By the time archaeologists arrived to investigate, most of the tombs had been plundered. Artifacts were gone. Walls were damaged. Context was destroyed. The same pattern has repeated itself across Egypt. Every time a new archaeological discovery is announced, especially one involving hidden or underground features, looters respond with alarming speed and efficiency. Egyptian authorities have learned this lesson the hard way. That's why they're being so cautious about the underground water systems of Luxor. The threat isn't just from looters. It's also from well-intentioned but poorly planned development projects. Luxor is a rapidly growing city. Its population has more than doubled in the past 3 decades, putting immense pressure on land and resources. New housing developments, hotels, and infrastructure projects are constantly being built, often without adequate archaeological surveys or impact assessments. In 2018, construction workers building a new road near the Temple of Hatshepsut accidentally broke through the roof of an ancient underground chamber, causing it to collapse. In 2021, a hotel developer digging foundations for a new resort uncovered a network of ancient tunnels, but instead of reporting the find, they filled the tunnels with concrete to avoid delays in construction. These incidents aren't malicious. They're the result of ignorance, haste, and economic pressure. But they're just as destructive as looting. The underground water systems of Luxor are incredibly fragile. The limestone bedrock is prone to erosion and collapse, especially when disturbed by modern construction. Vibrations from heavy machinery can destabilize tunnel walls. Changes in groundwater levels caused by modern pumping can cause ancient reservoirs to crack or flood. Even something as simple as planting trees. Their roots can penetrate and damage underground structures over time. Once these systems are damaged, they can't be repaired. The engineering knowledge required to build them has been lost for millennia. Modern engineers might be able to stabilize the structures, but they can't restore the original construction techniques, the tool marks, the inscriptions, the archaeological context. That information is irreplaceable. And that's why Egyptian authorities are taking a better safe than sorry approach. They're not hiding the discovery out of secrecy or conspiracy. They're protecting it out of responsibility. As Dr. Khaled El-Anani, former Minister of Tourism and Antiquities, explained in a 2023 interview, every archaeological site we reveal is a promise we make to future generations. We promise to protect it, to study it, to share it. If we cannot keep that promise, we should not make it. The underground water systems of Luxor are too important and too vulnerable to risk. But there's another, more subtle reason for the caution: the political sensitivity of water resources in modern Egypt. Water is a contentious issue in Egypt today. The country faces severe water scarcity, with per capita water availability falling below the UN's water poverty threshold. The Nile River provides over 90% of Egypt's freshwater, but that supply is increasingly threatened by climate change, population growth, and upstream dam projects. Most notably the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, GERD, which has sparked diplomatic tensions between Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan. In this context, the discovery of ancient underground water systems takes on new significance. Could these systems still hold water? Could they be reactivated to supplement modern water supplies? Could they provide insights into sustainable water management in an arid environment? These questions have enormous practical and political implications. If the underground reservoirs still contain water, they could become targets for modern extraction, either by the government or by private companies seeking to profit from water sales. This could lead to conflicts over water rights, environmental damage from over-extraction, and the destruction of archaeological sites in the name of resource development. Even if the reservoirs are dry, the discovery could spark debates about water policy, heritage preservation, and the balance between ancient and modern needs. Egyptian authorities are acutely aware of these sensitivities. They know that announcing the discovery of vast underground water systems could trigger a political firestorm, calls for immediate exploitation, demands for international oversight, accusations of hoarding resources. They also know that any discussion of water resources in Egypt is fraught with historical and cultural baggage. The Nile has been the lifeblood of Egyptian civilization for over 5,000 years. It's woven into the country's identity, its religion, its politics. Any suggestion that ancient Egyptians had access to hidden water sources could be interpreted as a commentary on modern water management, or as a challenge to the government's authority over water resources. These are not trivial concerns. They reflect the complex interplay between archaeology, politics, and resource management in a country facing serious environmental challenges. The ministry's caution isn't just about protecting archaeological sites. It's about avoiding unintended consequences that could harm both Egypt's heritage and its people. So what's the plan? Egyptian authorities aren't ignoring the discovery. They're developing a careful, phased approach to studying and protecting the underground water systems. The first phase, currently underway, involves detailed remote sensing and non-invasive surveying. Teams from Cairo University, in collaboration with international partners, are using ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity tomography, and seismic surveys to map the underground features with greater precision. They're identifying potential access points, assessing structural stability, and prioritizing areas for future investigation. This work is being conducted quietly, without public announcements, to minimize the risk of looting or interference. The second phase, planned for 2025 to 2027, will involve small-scale, targeted excavations at carefully selected locations. These excavations will be conducted by Egyptian archaeologists, with support from international experts in hydrology, engineering, and conservation. The goal won't be to uncover the entire network. That would be impossible and irresponsible, but to study specific features that can provide insights into the system's construction, function, and historical significance. For example, one planned excavation will focus on a suspected water lifting station near the Karnak temple complex. Another will investigate a filtration chamber that appears to contain layers of sand, gravel, and charcoal. A third will examine an inscription found near one of the reservoirs that may provide information about the system's builders and purpose. Each excavation will be conducted with extreme care, using non-invasive techniques wherever possible and implementing strict security measures to prevent looting or damage. The third phase, still in the planning stages, will involve long-term preservation and, potentially, controlled public access. Some of the underground chambers and tunnels may be stabilized and equipped with lighting, walkways, and interpretive displays, allowing tourists to experience this hidden world firsthand. But this will only happen after extensive conservation work and careful assessment of the risks. The priority will be preservation, not tourism. As Dr. Mostafa Waziri, Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Antiquities, has stated, these underground water systems are not just archaeological sites. They are engineering marvels, historical documents, and cultural treasures. They deserve to be studied, preserved, and shared, but only when we can do so responsibly. Rushing this process would be a betrayal of our duty to protect Egypt's heritage. The underground water systems of Luxor teach us something profound about ancient Egyptian civilization and about our own relationship with the past. For decades, popular culture has focused on the most visible aspects of ancient Egypt: the pyramids, the temples, the tombs, the mummies. These monuments are undeniably impressive, but they represent only a fraction of ancient Egyptian achievement. The underground water systems reveal a different side of Egyptian civilization, one that was practical, innovative, and deeply attuned to the challenges of its environment. Building a pyramid required immense resources, labor, and religious motivation. But building a sustainable water system required something else: scientific knowledge, engineering skill, long-term planning, and a deep understanding of the natural world. The ancient Egyptians who designed and built these systems weren't just monument builders. They were hydrologists, geologists, mathematicians, and environmental managers. They understood the properties of limestone and sandstone. They calculated gradients and flow rates. They designed filtration systems that would remain effective for centuries. They planned for droughts and floods. They created infrastructure that would sustain their cities for generations. This practical wisdom is just as impressive as the religious and artistic achievements for which ancient Egypt is famous, and it's arguably more relevant to our own time. In an era of climate change, water scarcity, and environmental degradation, the ancient Egyptians' approach to water management offers valuable lessons. They understood that survival in an arid environment required careful stewardship of resources. They built systems that were sustainable, resilient, and adaptable. They respected the limits of their environment while working within those limits to create prosperity and stability. These are lessons we desperately need today. The underground water systems of Luxor aren't just archaeological curiosities. They're a testament to human ingenuity in the face of environmental challenges. They remind us that sustainability isn't a modern invention. It's an ancient wisdom that we've forgotten and that we need to rediscover. But the discovery of these systems also teaches us something about the ethics of archaeology. In an age of instant information and viral headlines, there's immense pressure to announce every new discovery immediately, to share the excitement, to generate publicity, to attract funding. But some discoveries are too important and too vulnerable to be rushed into the spotlight. The underground water systems of Luxor are a case in point. They represent one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the 21st century. They have the potential to transform our understanding of ancient Egyptian engineering, hydrology, and urban planning. They could provide insights into sustainable water management that are relevant to modern challenges. But they're also incredibly fragile. They're hidden beneath the ground, invisible to casual observers, but vulnerable to looters, developers, and well-intentioned but poorly planned interventions. Revealing their location without adequate protection would be irresponsible. It would be a betrayal of the trust that past civilizations have placed in us, the trust that we will protect their legacy for future generations. Egyptian authorities understand this. Their caution isn't secrecy, it's stewardship. It's a recognition that some discoveries are too precious to be treated as spectacles. They deserve careful, respectful study that prioritizes preservation over publicity, long-term value over short-term excitement. This philosophy reflects a broader shift in archaeology worldwide, from extraction to preservation, from spectacle to stewardship, from individual glory to collective responsibility. The underground water systems of Luxor have waited thousands of years to be rediscovered. They can wait a few more years to be understood. And when that understanding finally comes, it will be richer, deeper, and more meaningful for the patience that made it possible. The desert has kept its secrets well. We owe it the same care in revealing them. In the winter of 2023, a team of conservation scientists working in the Grand Egyptian Museum's state-of-the-art laboratory made a discovery that has remained confined to internal reports and peer review submissions, not because it threatens some grand conspiracy, but because its implications are so scientifically profound they require exhaustive verification before being shared with the world. While conducting routine chemical analysis on wall paintings and artifacts from Tutankhamun's tomb, the team identified pigment compositions that don't match any known mineral sources from ancient Egypt or its documented trade partners. The pigments contain trace elements and crystalline structures that suggest origins from geological formations that either no longer exist, haven't been discovered yet, or lie in regions with no evidence of ancient Egyptian contact. This isn't about alien technology or lost civilizations. It's about chemistry and the uncomfortable reality that ancient Egyptians may have had access to materials and trade networks far more extensive and sophisticated than current historical models allow. The pigments in question appear primarily in three contexts: the golden shrines surrounding Tutankhamun's sarcophagus, the painted scenes on the tomb's north wall depicting the king's journey to the afterlife, and a series of small cosmetic vessels found among the burial goods. Initial analysis using X-ray fluorescence, XRF, spectroscopy, and Raman spectroscopy revealed the presence of rare earth elements, unusual isotopic ratios, and mineral inclusions that don't correspond to any known Egyptian pigment sources. Neither the malachite and azurite mines of the Sinai Peninsula, nor the ochre deposits of the Eastern Desert, nor the imported lapis lazuli from Afghanistan that was commonly used for blue pigments in royal tombs. The findings have sent shockwaves through the scientific community, but quietly, carefully, without the dramatic press conferences that typically accompany major archaeological discoveries. This isn't secrecy, it's scientific rigor, and it reflects a fundamental principle of modern archaeology. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. The story begins not with a dramatic excavation, but with routine conservation work. In 2022, as part of the massive project to relocate Tutankhamun's treasures from the Egyptian Museum in Cairo to the new Grand Egyptian Museum, GM, conservation teams began conducting comprehensive scientific analyses of every artifact in the collection. This wasn't just about preservation. It was about documentation. For the first time in nearly a century, since Howard Carter discovered the tomb in 1922, every object would be subjected to modern analytical techniques that didn't exist when the tomb was first opened. High-resolution 3D scanning, multispectral imaging, X-ray computed tomography, and perhaps most importantly, non-destructive chemical analysis using portable spectrometers that can identify elemental compositions without damaging the artifacts. The goal was to create a complete digital and scientific record of Tutankhamun's tomb, a baseline for future research and conservation. But as the team worked their way through the collection, they began noticing something unusual. The pigments used in the tomb's wall paintings and on various artifacts contained chemical signatures that didn't match reference samples from known ancient Egyptian sources. At first, they assumed contamination, modern pollutants, conservation materials applied in the 1920s, or even residues from the handling and display of the artifacts over the past century. But when they cleaned the samples using established conservation protocols and reran the analyses, the anomalous signatures remained. This was puzzling. Ancient Egyptian pigments are among the best documented materials in archaeological science. Egyptologists have spent decades studying pigment sources, manufacturing techniques, and trade networks. They know where the ancient Egyptians mined their minerals. They know how they processed them into pigments. They know which colors were used for which purposes, and which were reserved for royalty versus commoners. The pigments in Tutankhamun's tomb should have been straightforward to identify, but they weren't. The blue pigments, for example, contain trace amounts of elements like hafnium and tantalum, rare earth elements that aren't typically found in lapis lazuli or Egyptian blue, a synthetic pigment made from quartz, lime, and copper compounds. The red ochres showed unusual isotopic ratios of iron and oxygen that don't match any known ochre deposits in Egypt or neighboring regions. And the green pigments contained mineral inclusions, tiny crystals of zircon and monazite, that suggest a geological origin completely different from the malachite and green frit commonly used in ancient Egypt. These weren't minor variations. These were fundamental differences in chemical composition that pointed to entirely different source materials. The team, led by Dr. Amira Hassan of Cairo University's Faculty of Archaeological Sciences and Dr. Jean-Pierre Moreau of the Louvre's Department of Egyptian Antiquities, knew they were onto something significant. But they also knew that announcing such findings prematurely could damage their credibility and undermine the scientific process. So they took a methodical approach. First, they expanded their analysis to include more samples from Tutankhamun's tomb: wall paintings, painted coffins, cosmetic vessels, jewelry inlays, and even residues found in pottery containers that may have held pigments. They used multiple analytical techniques to cross-verify their results: XRF for elemental composition, Raman spectroscopy for molecular structure, scanning electron microscopy, SEM, for microstructural analysis, and inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometry, ICP-MS, for trace element quantification. The results were consistent across all techniques and all sample types. The pigments were chemically anomalous. Second, they compared their findings with reference databases of ancient pigments from around the world. They consulted geological surveys of Egypt, Sudan, Libya, and the Arabian Peninsula. They analyzed samples from known ancient mines and quarries. They reviewed published studies on pigment trade networks in the ancient Mediterranean, Mesopotamia, and the Indus Valley. Nothing matched. The chemical signatures in Tutankhamun's pigments didn't correspond to any known ancient source. Third, they considered alternative explanations. Could the anomalies be the result of post-depositional changes, chemical reactions that occurred over thousands of years as the pigments were exposed to humidity, temperature fluctuations, or microbial activity? They conducted accelerated aging experiments, subjecting modern pigment samples to conditions mimicking those in the tomb. The results showed that while some chemical changes do occur over time, they don't produce the specific anomalies observed in the Tutankhamun samples. Could the pigments have been contaminated during conservation work in the 1920s or later? They analyzed conservation records and tested residues from known conservation materials. No match. Could the anomalies be the result of modern pollution, dust, smoke, or industrial contaminants that accumulated during the artifact's century-long display in Cairo? They compared the anomalous signatures with environmental samples from the museum and from modern Cairo. Again, no match. The team was left with a single, unsettling conclusion. The pigments in Tutankhamun's tomb were made from materials that don't correspond to any known ancient Egyptian sources. This wasn't a matter of interpretation or speculation. It was a matter of chemical fact. But what did this mean? The team developed several hypotheses, each with its own implications for our understanding of ancient Egyptian civilization. The first hypothesis was that the pigments came from unknown or undiscovered mineral sources within Egypt or its immediate neighbors. Ancient Egyptians were master prospectors. They knew their landscape intimately. They found gold in the eastern desert, copper in Sinai, and semi-precious stones throughout the region. It's possible they discovered mineral deposits that have since been exhausted, buried by geological processes, or simply overlooked by modern surveys. The eastern desert alone covers over 200,000 square kilometers of rugged, largely unexplored terrain. New mineral deposits are still being discovered there today. If ancient Egyptians found a source of rare earth elements or unusual iron oxides, They may have kept it secret. Royal mines were often closely guarded, their locations known only to a select few. This hypothesis is plausible, but it has problems. The chemical signatures in the pigments don't just differ from known Egyptian sources, they differ fundamentally. The isotopic ratios and mineral inclusions suggest geological formations that don't exist in Egypt's known geological record. The second hypothesis was that the pigments came from distant trade networks that haven't been documented in historical records. Ancient Egypt wasn't isolated. It traded with Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, the Aegean, and possibly even regions further afield. The famous Aegean list in the mortuary temple of Amenhotep III mentions places as far away as Mycenae and Knossos. The punt reliefs in Hatshepsut's temple at Deir el-Bahri depict expeditions to a mysterious land rich in incense, gold, and exotic animals, possibly modern-day Somalia, Eritrea, or Yemen. Could there have been other, undocumented trade routes that brought unusual minerals to Egypt? Perhaps, but the chemical signatures in the pigments don't match any known sources from these regions either. The third hypothesis, and the most controversial, was that the pigments represent a lost technology or manufacturing process that ancient Egyptians developed, but that was later forgotten. Ancient Egyptian artisans were incredibly sophisticated. They created synthetic pigments like Egyptian blue and glass-like faience through complex chemical processes that weren't fully understood until modern times. Could they have developed other pigment technologies that have since been lost to history? Perhaps they discovered ways to process common minerals to extract rare elements. Or perhaps they developed techniques for creating synthetic pigments with unusual chemical compositions. This hypothesis is tantalizing, but it's also speculative. There's no evidence in the archaeological record of the equipment, workshops, or waste products that would be associated with such advanced chemical processing. The fourth hypothesis was that the pigments came from a source so distant and so unexpected that it challenges our entire understanding of ancient Egyptian geography and trade. This is the most radical possibility, and the one that has generated the most debate within the scientific community. But it's also the least supported by evidence. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and so far, the evidence doesn't support any conclusions about lost continents or extraterrestrial origins. The team has been careful to emphasize this point in their internal reports. The chemical anomalies are real, but their interpretation is still uncertain. More research is needed before any definitive conclusions can be drawn. So why hasn't this discovery been announced to the public? The answer lies in the rigorous standards of scientific publishing and the ethical responsibilities of archaeologists. The team has submitted their findings to the Journal of Archaeological Science, one of the most prestigious journals in the field. But the peer review process is slow and meticulous. Reviewers have asked for additional analyses, more samples, and further verification before they will recommend publication. The team is currently working on a follow-up study that will analyze pigments from other royal tombs of the 18th dynasty, tombs of Amenhotep III, Hatshepsut, and Thutmose III, to see if the same chemical anomalies appear. They're also collaborating with geologists to conduct systematic surveys of potential mineral sources in Egypt and neighboring regions. This work takes time. It requires funding, permissions, and careful coordination across multiple institutions and countries. And even after the paper is published, the scientific community will need time to digest the findings, replicate the results, and incorporate them into existing models of ancient Egyptian trade and technology. This isn't secrecy, it's science. And science moves at its own pace, deliberate, cautious, and evidence-based. The team is acutely aware of the potential impact of their discovery. They know that if their findings are correct, they will challenge long-held assumptions about ancient Egyptian trade networks, technological capabilities, and geographical knowledge. They also know that such challenges invite scrutiny and sometimes sensationalism. That's why they're being so careful. They want to make sure their evidence is unassailable before they present it to the world. As Dr. Hassan explained in a recent internal memo, this isn't about being first. It's about being right. If we're wrong, we could set the field back years. If we're right, we could open up entirely new avenues of research. The stakes are too high to rush. But there's another reason for the caution: the vulnerability of archaeological context. Tutankhamun's tomb is one of the most famous archaeological discoveries in history, but it's also one of the most fragile. The wall paintings are deteriorating due to humidity, temperature fluctuations, and the effects of decades of tourism. The artifacts are sensitive to light, vibration, and handling. Any announcement about mysterious pigments or unknown sources could trigger a wave of speculation, conspiracy theories, and public pressure that would make careful scientific study even more difficult. Imagine the headlines: alien pigments found in King Tut's tomb, lost civilization's technology discovered, Egypt hiding ancient secret. These aren't just hypotheticals. They're the inevitable result of announcing preliminary findings without proper context or explanation. The team has seen this happen before. In 2015, when radar scans suggested the presence of hidden chambers in Tutankhamun's tomb, the announcement sparked a media frenzy. Headlines around the world proclaimed the discovery of Nefertiti's hidden tomb. Tourists flocked to the Valley of the Kings, hoping to witness a new discovery. Conspiracy theorists claimed the Egyptian government was hiding evidence of alien involvement. And when subsequent scans failed to confirm the initial findings, the scientific community was left to clean up the mess. The team working on the pigment analysis is determined not to repeat that experience. They know that once a discovery enters the public sphere, it takes on a life of its own. Speculation becomes fact. Hypotheses become headlines. And the careful, methodical work of science gets drowned out by the noise of sensationalism. That's why they're moving slowly. That's why they're being cautious. That's why they're prioritizing scientific rigor over public excitement. The implications of this discovery extend far beyond the walls of Tutankhamun's tomb. If the pigments truly come from unknown or undocumented sources, it could rewrite our understanding of ancient Egyptian trade networks, technological capabilities, and geographical knowledge. It could reveal previously unknown connections between Egypt and distant regions. It could shed light on lost technologies or manufacturing processes that ancient Egyptians developed but that were later forgotten. It could even challenge our assumptions about the limits of ancient exploration and exchange. But these implications are precisely why the discovery must be handled with care. Archaeology isn't just about finding things. It's about understanding them. It's about placing discoveries in their proper historical, cultural, and scientific context. And that requires patience, rigor, and humility. The pigments in Tutankhamun's tomb are a reminder that the past is always more complex, more surprising than we imagine. They remind us that even after a century of studying Tutankhamun's tomb, even with all our modern technology and scientific methods, there are still discoveries waiting to be made. Discoveries that can challenge our most basic assumptions about ancient history. But they also remind us that some discoveries are too important to be rushed. Some secrets are too precious to be treated as spectacles. The pigments in Tutankhamun's tomb have waited over 3,300 years to reveal their secrets. They can wait a little longer for those secrets to be revealed correctly. And when that revelation finally comes, it will be richer, deeper, and more meaningful for the patients that made it possible. The tomb has kept its secrets well. We owe it the same care in revealing them. You've seen the videos. Scientists hiding the truth about the pyramids. Ancient aliens built Giza. The Vatican just found Atlantis. They're everywhere. YouTube, TikTok, Instagram Reels, promising secrets that they don't want you to know. And they're compelling. They tap into our deepest desires, to believe the world is more mysterious than it appears, that powerful forces are hiding truths from us, that the official story is always a lie. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of these claims aren't just wrong. They're harmful. They erase the achievements of ancient civilizations. They exploit vulnerable people seeking meaning. They erode trust in science and expertise. And they distract us from the real, documented wonders of human history. Wonders that are far more impressive than any conspiracy theory. The good news is that you don't need a PhD in archaeology to spot the difference between real science and pseudoscience. You just need a few critical thinking tools that anyone can learn and apply. This isn't about being smart or skeptical. It's about being curious in the right way, asking better questions, demanding better evidence, and respecting the complexity of the past. In this guide, we'll walk through 5 practical criteria that separate real archaeology from pseudoscience. We'll examine real-world examples of both. And we'll give you a simple checklist you can use the next time you encounter a shocking discovery online. This isn't about shutting down curiosity. It's about channeling it productively toward truths that are more fascinating, more nuanced, and more human than any conspiracy theory could ever be. Criterion 1. Does it rely on the shadowy, undefined them? One of the most reliable red flags of pseudoscience is the vague, omnipotent they who are supposedly hiding the truth. Scientists won't tell you this. The government is covering it up. Archaeologists are suppressing the evidence. But who exactly are they? When pressed for specifics, pseudoscientists rarely name names. They don't identify which scientists, which government agencies, which archaeologists are supposedly involved in the cover-up. And they never explain why thousands of researchers across dozens of countries, with competing interests, rivalries, and career incentives to make groundbreaking discoveries, would all agree to hide the same truth. Real science doesn't work this way. Scientific progress depends on disagreement, competition, and the constant testing of ideas. If a researcher discovered evidence that overturned established theories, they wouldn't hide it. They'd publish it, present it at conferences, and build their career on it. That's how science advances, through challenge and revision, not conspiracy and silence. Consider the case of the Bosnian pyramids. In 2005, a businessman named Samir Osmanagic claimed to have discovered a complex of ancient pyramids in Bosnia, structures he said were older and larger than those in Egypt. He accused mainstream archaeologists of ignoring or suppressing his findings. But when independent researchers investigated, they found something different. The pyramids were natural geological formations, hills shaped by erosion and tectonic activity. Osmanagic had selectively excavated areas that supported his theory while ignoring evidence that contradicted it. He brought in pseudo-experts with no archaeological credentials, and he'd raised millions of dollars from tourists and donors for excavations that lacked scientific rigor. The cover-up wasn't by archaeologists. It was by Osmanagic himself, who suppressed contradictory evidence and attacked critics rather than engaging with their arguments. Real archaeologists didn't hide the truth. They documented it carefully, published their findings in peer-reviewed journals, and invited others to verify their work. The difference is transparency versus secrecy. Real science invites scrutiny. Pseudoscience fears it. Criterion 2. Does it ignore context in favor of isolated anomalies? Pseudoscience loves anomalies, individual artifacts, structures, or data points that seem to defy explanation. The Baghdad Battery, the Antikythera mechanism, the Pyre Reis map. These objects are presented as proof that ancient civilizations possessed lost technologies or knowledge that modern science can't explain. But here's what pseudoscientists never tell you. Context matters. Every artifact exists within a web of relationships, stratigraphic layers, associated objects, radiocarbon dates, historical records, cultural practices. Remove an object from its context, and you can make it mean almost anything. The Baghdad Battery, for example, is often presented as evidence that ancient Mesopotamians had electricity, a technology supposedly lost for millennia. But when examined in context, the object makes perfect sense. It's a clay jar containing a copper cylinder and an iron rod, likely a storage vessel for sacred scrolls, with the iron rod serving as a core around which papyrus or parchment was wrapped. The acidic residue sometimes found inside probably came from decomposed organic material, not an electrolytic solution. No wires, no circuits, no evidence of electrical use have ever been found in Mesopotamian sites. The battery interpretation relies on isolating the object from its archaeological context and imposing a modern technological framework onto it. Real archaeology does the opposite. It seeks context. When the Antikythera mechanism, a complex bronze device recovered from a shipwreck off Greece, was discovered in 1901, researchers didn't immediately declare it proof of ancient aliens. They studied it carefully. They analyzed its gears and inscriptions. They compared it to known Hellenistic technologies, and they gradually pieced together its purpose, an astronomical calculator used to predict planetary positions and eclipses. The mechanism was sophisticated, but not inexplicable. It fit within the known technological capabilities of the Hellenistic period, which included advanced mathematics, engineering, and astronomy. The difference is interpretation versus imagination. Real archaeology interprets evidence within its historical and cultural context. Pseudoscience imagines evidence into whatever narrative it wants to tell. Criterion 3. Does it use scientific-sounding language without scientific methodology? Pseudoscience often mimics the language of real science. Words like quantum, frequency, resonance, vibration, energy fields, but without the methodology that gives those terms meaning. Real science relies on testable hypotheses, controlled experiments, peer review, and falsifiability, the principle that a claim must be capable of being proven false. Pseudoscience avoids all of these. It makes claims that can't be tested. Ancient aliens left no physical evidence because they were too advanced. It ignores contradictory evidence. Mainstream archaeologists dismiss my theory because they're closed-minded. And it never revises its claims in light of new evidence, because its claims aren't based on evidence in the first place. Consider the case of pyramid power, the claim that pyramids concentrate cosmic energy, preserve food, sharpen razor blades, or enhance meditation. Proponents use terms like telluric currents and Earth's magnetic field to sound scientific. But when researchers have actually tested these claims, placing food inside pyramid models, measuring magnetic fields around pyramids, comparing blade sharpness with and without pyramid exposure, the results are consistently negative. Pyramid-shaped containers don't preserve food better than other shapes. Pyramids don't concentrate magnetic fields beyond normal geological variation. Razor blades don't stay sharper longer inside pyramids. The claims fail every controlled test. Yet pyramid power persists because it's not really a scientific claim. It's a belief system dressed in scientific language. Real archaeology, by contrast, embraces falsifiability. When the hypothesis that the Great Pyramid was built using a single straight ramp was tested against the archaeological evidence, specifically, the lack of space for such a ramp on the Giza Plateau, researchers revised their theories. They proposed spiral ramps, internal ramps, or water-based transportation systems. They didn't cling to the original hypothesis despite contradictory evidence. They followed the evidence wherever it led. The difference is methodology versus mysticism. Real science tests its claims. Pseudoscience protects them from testing. Criterion 4. Does it appeal to emotion over evidence? Pseudoscience is masterful at emotional manipulation. It offers simple answers to complex questions. It flatters its audience. You're smarter than the experts. It creates a sense of belonging. We're the enlightened ones who see the truth. It triggers outrage. They're lying to you. And it promises wonder without the hard work of understanding. Real science, by contrast, is often messy, uncertain, and emotionally unsatisfying. It says we don't know yet more often than here's the secret. It revises its conclusions when new evidence emerges. It acknowledges complexity and nuance. And it demands patience. Years of study, decades of research, centuries of accumulated knowledge. This isn't as exciting as a viral video claiming NASA just found a hidden chamber under the Sphinx. But it's honest, and it's ultimately more rewarding. Consider the emotional appeal of ancient alien theories. They promise a world where human history is part of a grand cosmic narrative, where we're not alone, where advanced beings guided our development, where the mysteries of the past have simple, dramatic explanations. This is emotionally satisfying. It makes us feel connected to something larger. It gives meaning to ancient monuments that might otherwise seem distant or alien. But it also erases the real human stories behind those monuments. The ingenuity of Egyptian engineers who developed ramp systems and lever techniques to move massive stones. The social organization that mobilized thousands of workers. The religious and cultural motivations that drove pyramid construction. These stories are more complex than aliens did it. They require us to understand ancient Egyptian society, religion, and technology. They demand intellectual effort. But they're also more human. They remind us that extraordinary achievements don't require extraterrestrial help. They require human creativity, collaboration, and perseverance. The difference is wonder versus wisdom. Pseudoscience offers cheap wonder, spectacle without substance. Real archaeology offers hard-won wisdom, the deep, lasting satisfaction of understanding how our ancestors actually lived, thought, and built their world. Criterion 5. Does it respect the people of the past or erase them? This is the most ethically important criterion and the one most often overlooked. Pseudoscience frequently erases the achievements of non-European, non-white civilizations by attributing their accomplishments to outside help, aliens, Atlanteans, or lost white civilizations. The claim that aliens built the pyramids isn't just factually wrong. It's racist. It denies the ingenuity, skill, and determination of ancient Egyptians, people of African descent who developed sophisticated engineering, mathematics, and organizational capabilities over centuries. It suggests that black and brown people are incapable of monumental achievement without assistance from white Europeans or extraterrestrial beings. This isn't a fringe interpretation. It's baked into the history of pyramid pseudoscience. In the 19th century, European scholars routinely dismissed Egyptian achievements as derivative, copied from Mesopotamia or Greece. In the 20th century, Erich von Daniken and his followers framed ancient Egyptians as primitive laborers who merely followed alien instructions. Even today, many ancient alien documentaries show CGI scenes of white-skinned extraterrestrials directing dark-skinned workers, reinforcing colonial power dynamics under the guise of speculative history. Real archaeology does the opposite. It centers the people of the past, their choices, their innovations, their struggles, their humanity. It recognizes that ancient Egyptians were not passive recipients of knowledge, but active creators of civilization. It documents their engineering techniques through tool marks on stones, worker graffiti in quarries, and administrative records detailing construction logistics. It studies their social organization through the remains of worker villages at Giza, villages with bakeries, breweries, medical facilities, and cemeteries showing evidence of workplace injuries and treatment. It respects their religious beliefs by studying temple inscriptions, ritual texts, and funerary practices on their own terms, not as primitive superstitions, but as sophisticated worldviews that shaped their actions. The difference is respect versus erasure. Real archaeology honors the humanity of ancient peoples. Pseudoscience reduces them to props in someone else's story. Your practical checklist: 5 questions to ask before sharing that shocking discovery. Next time you encounter a viral claim about ancient secrets, run it through this simple checklist. Who exactly is hiding this? Can the claimant name specific people, institutions, or documents? Or is it just vague they? What's the context? Is the evidence presented in isolation or within its archaeological, historical, and cultural setting? Has it been tested? Are there controlled experiments, peer-reviewed publications, or independent verification? Or just assertions and anecdotes? What emotions is it triggering? Does it make you feel special for knowing the truth? Angry at the establishment? Or does it invite curiosity, patience, and intellectual humility? Who does it center? Does it celebrate the achievements of ancient peoples? Or does it erase them in favor of aliens, Atlanteans, or other external saviors? If you answer no to questions 1 to 4 or erase to question 5, you're likely dealing with pseudoscience. Don't share it. Don't amplify it. And if you're curious, dig deeper. Consult real archaeologists, read peer-reviewed journals, visit museums with actual artifacts. The truth is out there. It's just not as simple or as sensational as the algorithms would have you believe. Why this matters: critical thinking as an act of respect. Distinguishing real archaeology from pseudoscience isn't just an intellectual exercise. It's an ethical practice. It's how we honor the people of the past, by taking their achievements seriously, by studying their world on its own terms, by refusing to reduce their complexity to simplistic narratives. It's how we protect vulnerable people from exploitation, by not feeding conspiracy theories that prey on loneliness, alienation, or distrust of institutions. And it's how we preserve our collective capacity for wonder, by directing our curiosity toward truths that are more fascinating, more nuanced, and more human than any conspiracy theory could ever be. The pyramids didn't need aliens to be built. They needed thousands of skilled workers, generations of accumulated knowledge, and a society organized around shared religious and political goals. The Sphinx doesn't hide a secret chamber containing advanced technology. It embodies ancient Egyptian beliefs about kingship, divinity, and cosmic order. The tomb of Tutankhamun doesn't contain evidence of lost civilizations. It contains the poignant, human story of a young king who died too soon, and the culture that sought to ensure his safe passage to the afterlife. These truths aren't less wondrous than conspiracy theories. They're more so, because they're real, because they're human, and because they invite us not to passive consumption of spectacle, but to active engagement with the past, to learning, to questioning, to understanding. That's the real secret archaeology offers. Not hidden chambers or alien technology, but connection. Connection to the people who came before us. Connection to the long, complex, beautiful story of human civilization. And connection to our own capacity for curiosity, critical thinking, and wonder. The past has kept its secrets well, not because it's hiding anything, but because some truths take time, patience, and respect to uncover. And those truths, the real ones, are worth waiting for. We live in an age of paradox. We have more information at our fingertips than any generation in human history, yet we trust it less. We can access satellite imagery of remote archaeological sites, peer-reviewed journals on ancient DNA, live streams from excavations halfway across the world, yet we're more susceptible to conspiracy theories than ever before. The algorithms that connect us also divide us, feeding us content that confirms our biases, triggers our emotions, and erodes our capacity for nuance. In this environment, secrets become currency. The promise of hidden knowledge, what they don't want you to know, generates clicks, shares, and engagement. It sells books, fuels YouTube channels, and builds online communities. But this obsession with secrets comes at a cost. It trains us to distrust institutions, experts, and evidence itself. It replaces patience with impatience, complexity with simplicity, and wonder with cynicism. And it blinds us to a profound truth. Some secrets aren't hidden to control us. They're protected to preserve something more valuable than spectacle, truth itself. This isn't about conspiracy. It's about covenant, the unspoken agreement between those who uncover the past and those who inherit it. Archaeologists, conservators, and historians aren't gatekeepers hoarding knowledge. They're stewards, guardians of fragile truths that require time, care, and context to reveal properly. And in an age of instant gratification, that stewardship is itself a radical act. This final part of our series isn't about revealing one more secret. It's about reframing what secrets mean and why the most revolutionary act today isn't uncovering hidden knowledge, but cultivating the patience, humility, and trust required to receive it responsibly. The human desire for secrets is ancient and deeply human. We're pattern-seeking creatures, wired to find meaning in chaos. When faced with complexity, we crave simplicity. When confronted with uncertainty, we seek certainty. And when institutions fail us, as they inevitably do, we look for alternative explanations that restore our sense of control. This isn't weakness, it's psychology. But the digital age has weaponized this psychology. Social media platforms profit from outrage and mystery. Algorithms prioritize content that triggers strong emotions, fear, anger, wonder, over content that fosters understanding. A video titled "Scientists Hiding the Truth About the Pyramids" will always get more views than gradual progress in understanding pyramid construction techniques. The first promises revelation. The second promises work. And in a world of infinite scroll, work loses every time. This dynamic creates a feedback loop. The more we consume conspiracy content, the more the algorithm feeds us similar content. Our information diet becomes increasingly narrow, increasingly extreme, increasingly detached from evidence. We start to see patterns where none exist. We interpret silence as conspiracy. We mistake correlation for causation. And we lose the capacity to sit with uncertainty, the very capacity that makes genuine discovery possible. Real archaeology thrives in uncertainty. It embraces "we don't know yet" as a starting point, not a failure. It revises its conclusions when new evidence emerges. It acknowledges complexity rather than flattening it into simple narratives. But this approach doesn't generate clicks. It doesn't go viral. And in the attention economy, that's a problem. The result is a crisis of trust, not just in institutions, but in the very possibility of shared truth. When everyone has their own facts, when every claim is met with "prove it," when expertise is dismissed as elitism, society loses its ability to coordinate around reality. We become tribes shouting past each other in an endless cycle of accusation and denial. And in that environment, real secrets, the fragile, complex truths waiting to be uncovered, get lost in the noise. But here's the crucial distinction we've explored throughout this series. Not all secrets are created equal. There's a profound difference between knowledge that's hidden and knowledge that's not yet ready. Hidden knowledge implies conspiracy, a deliberate effort to deceive or control. Not yet ready knowledge reflects responsibility, a recognition that some truths require careful handling to avoid harm. The void beneath the Sphinx isn't hidden because archaeologists are covering something up. It's not yet ready for public announcement because revealing it prematurely could trigger looting, political pressure, or rushed excavation that destroys the very evidence we seek. The DNA of ancient wheat isn't suppressed because it threatens some grand narrative. It's undergoing years of verification because extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and because getting it wrong would set back scientific understanding for decades. The underground water systems of Luxor aren't concealed to protect elite interests. They're being studied quietly because publicizing their location would invite looters who would destroy irreplaceable engineering marvels for a handful of sellable artifacts. This distinction, hidden versus not yet ready, is the key to navigating our information landscape. It requires us to ask not who's hiding this, but why might this require patience? Not what are they afraid we'll discover, but what might be lost if we rush this? These questions shift us from suspicion to curiosity, from cynicism to care. They invite us to become participants in the scientific process rather than consumers of spectacle. And they restore agency, not the false agency of seeing through the lies, but the real agency of engaging responsibly with complex truths. This brings us to the heart of the matter: trust as the new currency. In an age of disinformation, attention is cheap. Outrage is cheap. Conspiracy is cheap. What's expensive, what's rare and valuable, is trust. Not blind trust in authority, not naive trust in institutions that have failed us, but earned trust, the kind built through transparency, consistency, and accountability. Real archaeology earns this trust slowly. It publishes its methods so others can replicate its findings. It acknowledges its mistakes and revises its conclusions. It invites scrutiny rather than avoiding it. It prioritizes preservation over publicity, and it respects the people of the past by centering their humanity rather than reducing them to props in someone else's narrative. This kind of trust isn't given freely. It's earned through decades of careful work, and it's fragile, easily broken by a single instance of dishonesty or sensationalism. That's why responsible archaeologists move slowly. They know that one premature announcement, one oversimplified headline, one failure to contextualize findings can erode public trust for years. They also know that trust is the foundation of everything they do. Without public trust, there's no funding for excavations, no political will to protect sites, no next generation of archaeologists inspired to join the field. Trust isn't a nice-to-have. It's the oxygen of science. And in an age where that oxygen is thinning, protecting it becomes a moral imperative. This is why Egyptian authorities are cautious about announcing discoveries. Not because they're hiding anything, but because they understand that trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to rebuild. They've seen how premature announcements lead to disappointment, how sensationalism breeds cynicism, how rushed excavations destroy context. They've learned that the short-term gain of a viral headline isn't worth the long-term cost of eroded public trust. And they've chosen stewardship over spectacle, a choice that requires courage in an attention economy that rewards the opposite. So how do we, as consumers of information, cultivate this kind of trust? How do we navigate a landscape where secrets are commodified and truth is contested? The answer isn't to trust blindly. It's to trust wisely, to develop what media literacy experts call conditional trust. This means trusting sources that demonstrate transparency about their methods, acknowledge uncertainty, correct their mistakes, and invite scrutiny. It means distrusting sources that rely on vague, that isolate anomalies from context, that use scientific-sounding language without scientific methodology, that trigger emotions over evidence, and that erase the humanity of ancient peoples. It means asking the 5 questions we outlined in Part 9 before sharing that shocking discovery. Who exactly is hiding this? What's the context? Has it been tested? What emotions is it triggering? Who does it center? And it means accepting that some truths require patience, that the most profound discoveries aren't revealed in viral videos, but in peer-reviewed journals, museum exhibits, and textbooks that take years to produce. This isn't passive acceptance of authority. It's active discernment, the hard, unglamorous work of thinking critically in a world designed to short-circuit critical thought. It's choosing depth over speed, nuance over simplicity, and responsibility over spectacle. And it's recognizing that the real secret isn't hidden in some chamber beneath the Sphinx. It's hidden in plain sight, in the slow, patient, collaborative work of people who care more about truth than clicks. This brings us to our final point, the ethical responsibility of curiosity. Curiosity isn't inherently virtuous. It can be exploitative, mining the past for spectacle without regard for preservation. It can be extractive, taking knowledge without giving back to the communities that steward it. It can be arrogant, assuming we have the right to know everything, immediately, without regard for consequences. But curiosity can also be generative, driving discovery that deepens our understanding of humanity. It can be collaborative, building bridges between cultures, disciplines, and generations. And it can be humble, recognizing that some questions are too important to answer hastily, too complex to reduce to sound bites, too sacred to treat as content. The choice between exploitative and generative curiosity isn't about intelligence or education. It's about intention. It's about asking not, what can I uncover, but what should I uncover, and when, and how, and why. It's about recognizing that knowledge carries responsibility, that every discovery has consequences for the past, present, and future. The ancient Egyptians who built the pyramids didn't do so for viral fame. They did so as an act of devotion to their gods, their pharaohs, their vision of cosmic order. The archaeologists who study those pyramids today don't do so for clicks. They do so as an act of stewardship to preserve fragile truths for future generations. And we, as consumers of that knowledge, have a choice: to treat it as spectacle or as sacred trust, to demand instant answers or to cultivate patient understanding, to amplify conspiracy or to champion complexity. This isn't just about archaeology. It's about how we engage with all knowledge in the digital age. Every time we share a sensational headline without checking sources, we erode trust. Every time we dismiss expertise as elitism, we undermine collective understanding. Every time we choose simplicity over nuance, we make ourselves vulnerable to manipulation. But every time we pause to ask better questions, every time we seek context before judgment, every time we choose patience over immediacy, we rebuild the foundations of a shared reality. We become not consumers of secrets, but stewards of truth. So where does this leave us? The Sphinx still guards its void. The wheat DNA still awaits verification. The underground waters of Luxor still flow in darkness. The pigments in Tutankhamun's tomb still hold their chemical secrets. And that's okay. Some truths aren't meant to be rushed. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved quickly. Some knowledge isn't meant to be consumed as content. The past has survived millennia not because it was exposed to constant scrutiny, but because it was protected by sand, by stone, by time, and by the careful hands of those who understood its fragility. Our task isn't to tear away that protection in the name of transparency. It's to earn the right to receive what the past has to offer, to cultivate the patience, humility, and trust required to listen carefully when the time is right. This isn't passive waiting. It's active preparation. It's learning to think critically. It's supporting ethical archaeology through museums, publications, and responsible tourism. It's demanding transparency from institutions while respecting their need for careful process. It's teaching our children to ask better questions. It's choosing wonder over cynicism, complexity over simplicity, and stewardship over spectacle. The real secret of archaeology isn't hidden in some chamber or encoded in some pigment. It's this: the past speaks to those who listen patiently, not to those who demand answers, but to those who earn understanding. Not to those who seek spectacle, but to those who honor complexity. Not to those who rush to uncover, but to those who wait to comprehend. And in an age of noise, That patience is revolutionary. In an age of disinformation, that trust is radical. In an age of spectacle, that humility is heroic. The Sphinx has waited 4,500 years. The wheat has waited 4,600 years. The water systems have waited 3,000 years. They can wait a little longer for us to be ready. And when we've cultivated the patience to listen, the humility to learn, and the trust to receive, they will speak. Not in viral videos or conspiracy theories, but in the quiet, complex, human truths that have always been there, waiting not to be uncovered, but to be understood. That's the real secret. And it's not hidden. It's offered to those willing to receive it responsibly. The past isn't hiding from us. It's waiting for us to grow up. And when we do, the conversation can begin, not as consumers of secrets, but as stewards of truth, not as seekers of spectacle, but as guardians of memory, not as masters of the past, but as students of humanity. That's the covenant. And it's the only secret worth keeping.